When you look back at many of the key game developers from the olden days, you'll notice that for one reason or the other, some have faded out over time. Hudson Soft, Taito, Technos Japan, devs that defined genres back in the day, and just aren't what they used to be. The three examples I used having now become either completely abandoned with their IPs and maybe some staff folded into a bigger company, or becoming essentially a secondary office like Taito is to Square Enix. They may exist or have a looming presence in some form today, but they've fallen into this obscure area where it's mainly retro game enthusiasts and nostalgic 40-somethings that'll pick up their recent output. An idea I want y'all to have in mind, because our main subject for today, Japanese game developer Sunsoft, is not quite one of those companies. Sunsoft, while more popular in the 80s and early 90s than today when they hardly exist, was still never the big cheese or anything. Their best performing and highest quality games were typically licensed Warner Brothers entries such as NES Batman, Death of Superman, and Gremlins 2, as well as ports of varying quality of other companies' games like Spy Hunter and Spy Kids on NES. Many of these were great, with Batman and Spy Hunter NES being games I have fond memories of playing in dingy comic stores. However, their output of original content never caught on much. In fact, their only huge hit original series came from the NES game Blaster Master, which itself suffered a radical roller coaster of an identity crisis up until the recent Blaster Master Zero trilogy, spearheaded by our boys Inti Creates, and the main subject of today. But before I can delve right into that, I think we need to back up for context on the whole Blaster Master ordeal. I don't feel like immediately turning on the first Blaster Master Zero to discuss that gives us the whole story. Sometime in 1987, likely around the end, Sunsoft appointed Higashiya Hiroaki and Koichi Kitazumi to direct a new game with a small team of about 5 people. Both of them had worked at Sunsoft for a while in small roles, but this would be their first directorial work. The team ended up spending a little under a year on it, aiming to make a game that showed the best sprite work, music, and gameplay they thought possible on NES at the time, putting their hearts and souls into the Famicom sci-fi epic Super Planetary War Chronicle MetaFight, a revolutionary work in most gameplay and graphical aspects. I mean, it had an alright story too. In the year 2052, on the advanced planet Sophia, civilization has advanced to new heights thanks to times of peace. However, the peace they strived for came to an end when the evil alien tyrant Goez sends his army to attack the peaceful planet. While all hope seems lost, a few surviving military members happen to stay aboard a space satellite, including young soldier Kane Gardner and scientist Jennifer Cornett. To stop the alien threat, Jennifer sends Kane back to planet Sophia in the first of her ultimate vehicle weapons, a hyper-mobile tank metal attacker. With a quick exit from the satellite, Kane lands on planet Sophia to stop the alien invasion. However, with the exception of his exit scene, the entire story was just in the manual, which, you know, is standard for the era, just worth mentioning for later. From a technical and design perspective, MetaFight was outstanding for the time. First off, whenever I think of retro vehicle shooting games, my first thought is usually a shmup or racing game. Galaga, Spy Hunter, titles that focus on one specific task and usually don't grant a whole lot of movement. In my mind, vehicle equals stiff, so I can focus on shooty things. MetaFight took a different approach. It's an action platformer like Contra or Mega Man taking place in a tank. A tank that controls with the same agility as other platformers of the era. In fact, the metal attacker is even looser than the likes of Ninja Gaiden or Mega Man, with upgrades like a hover, wall climbing, 3 different sub-weapons, ceiling drives, diving. Traversing these huge Metroid-inspired maps was way less daunting than you'd expect from driving a tank. It's super easy to get anywhere once you're powered up, at least when you're in the tank. MetaFight's biggest draw came from the 2 completely different gameplay styles it offered. Fast-paced side-view platformer tank action, juxtaposed to a slower, dangerous, on-foot overhead section as Kane, while outside of the tank, where all he has is normal ammo and the slightly stronger grenades. Alright, typical review time for a little bit. What you're mainly looking for in the tank are these little caves. In each of the 8 areas, one of them has a boss fight, while the rest are used to find capsules that upgrade Kane's gun. His gun also has 8 levels that affect the strength, length of the shot, and shot direction. For the most part, you just want to be at max level, but the way it interacts with the walls can be difficult to control, so sometimes it's just easier to get a move on once you're around level 4 or 5. although I wouldn't recommend purposefully staying low, because every time Kane takes a hit, you lose 1 gun level, meaning you'll get back down to 1 pretty fast. This makes the on-foot sections brutally difficult, mainly because of the bosses. They can withstand a shit ton of damage, and the first level blaster is not gonna cut it. If you walk in without a full gun upgrade, you're dying or fighting for 10 minutes straight. If their goal was to make Kane feel like a small grunt soldier against these huge behemoths, then yeah, they definitely succeeded. In my playthrough, at first I was feeling disappointed that so many caves led to dead ends. Typically in a non-linear game, you expect at least a small permanent upgrade for going off the beaten path. But then I realized, oh shit, those extra paths were purely to grind out temporary gun upgrades. And fighting against the boss can be annoying this way because, you guessed it, you'll need to regrind between boss attempts. And yeah, thankfully we're in the year of our Lord 2023 and I can abuse save states. If you value your time, I'd recommend that because you only get 3 lives and the American version has limited continues as well. Especially important since some of these dungeons do not value your time. A couple of them, especially in the later half, can go on forever with nothing or very little to gain from it, which then means you need to walk in and out with a risk of leaving with even less than you had going in. Trust me, due to how bad the early level guns are, it's super easy to fall from 3 to 1, but you know, at the end of the day, that's just how old NES games were. Lots of them had 1 or 2 things that made them ungodly difficult, and in MetaFight's case, it was the turbo hard bosses and difficult to manage upgrade system, both of which you can easily mitigate today with save states or the rewind feature on the Switch Online. And even back then, it wasn't such a difficult experience that it took away from the world of Sophia. For 1988, MetaFight looked good. Every stage offered a unique new experience, from the humid swamps of Area 1, the claustrophobic castle in Area 2, Area 6's frozen factory, techno Star Trek shit in Area 3. It made Sophia feel like a real world ravaged by alien forces. Perhaps the aliens caused the factory to freeze, or they're at fault for clogging up the sewer system. This is a war for a world that suffered consequences, and Kane needs to stop it in his giant tank, which itself is a masterclass of early vehicle sprite work. Every piece of this tank moves with the gun having a 5-way shot, the wheels popping like a lowrider, and when the wheels flip over to hover, fuck does that look swag. But you know, side-scrollers were already looking pretty good by 1988. Castlevania 1 already came out 2 years prior, and that achieved side-scrolling graphics only a few steps below what Blaster Master got going. But with the overhead sections, oh shit. I want y'all to stop and think about overhead games on NES. Your first thought is probably Zelda, and the second one is probably an RPG like Dragon Quest, or maybe some hipster over here is gonna say Crystalis. But here's the deal. Pretty much every overhead game that came out before MetaFight did not look nearly as good as MetaFight. Extremely detailed sprite work such as Kane himself and full backgrounds with multiple patterns on the same screen just weren't seen back then. If you set MetaFight up to fucking booby kids and make me choose one, then yeah, that's the first time I'm saying no to boobies. Having 2 fully functional, good-looking gameplay styles that coexist with each other was revolutionary for the time. No one else had really done this, or at least not to the same quality, which is why it sucks to say MetaFight performed really bad in Japan. Did not sell well, little profit made back, the team felt shame going to work the following weeks, and it's relegated to a hidden gem status by Japanese gaming otaku. And I can kinda see how that happened. The original commercial for MetaFight wasn't anything special, and neither were the key art and story. Yeah, today we look at these characters and think, whoa, sci-fi 80s anime look. But during the 80s in Japan, everyone was doing an 80s anime look. If it's on a shelf next to the Famicom games for Dragon Ball, Saint Seiya, or Gundam, kids are gonna grab the ones they recognize from TV or Shonen Jump. Even if some of those adaptations had problems with them, it's Gundam, you know what Gundam is. A sad fate for such a unique and revolutionary game for the Famicom. However, it did receive a second chance once it went out west. When Sunsoft began work on releasing MetaFight in North America, they made some odd decisions. Not to the gameplay, with the exception of one room that used to require a leap of faith and adding a limited amount of continues, the gameplay and level design of the Western release is exactly the same. Tank got movement, foot combat dangerous, music pretty good, I forgot to mention that, and the bosses make my pants wet. What's actually changed here is the story. Jason Frudnick is your typical New York teenager, wearing his jeans, white t-shirt, says no to drugs, prays before bed, and probably snaps down the street while singing musical numbers. An ideal American boy living at his home with his pet frog, Fred. When all of a sudden, one day, Fred decides he's gonna go for it and runs away from home. And oh shit, Jason fucked up. He took out the radioactive waste today when radiation pickup day is Thursday. Thus, Fred slurps some nice little radio juice to turn giant and then jumps down the giant fucking hole that also happens to lay next to Jason's house. Jason, what the fuck is this doing here? In a panic, Jason slides down the hole to find a giant tank and battle armor just chilling down here. Don't worry about it. And thus, with a swap from satellite to cave in the intro animation, we begin a journey where Jason blasts through tons of radiation-infused mutants underneath New York so he can find his frog, Fred. A plot change that completely recontextualizes the entire experience. No longer do you explore a planet under attack from aliens, now it's a warped journey to the center of the Earth-type acid trip where the normal civilian Jason has no clue what may come next. A radically different dynamic from the confident soldier Kane. Even when it comes to the ending, Kane fulfilled his mission to kill the evil Emperor Gomez to save his planet, while Jason just accidentally kills the plutonium boss, leader of all mutants, while trying to find his pet frog, which they acknowledge by putting Fred in the ending. And it's kind of funny, if you rapidly press start to skip the intro and don't read the manual, you cannot tell any difference between these two releases. Hell, besides the intro from MetaFight, I've only used footage of the American release this whole time, because that's all I need. Now, which story I like better? That's kinda tough. On one hand, as a big anime fan, I love the epic sci-fi war scenario that clearly explains what's going on. On the other hand, a trippy radioactive New York frog is fucking ridiculous. I love it. And Americans did too. Blaster Master performed significantly better than MetaFight. I wouldn't consider it a brand new A-list NES game. After all, he wasn't even in Captain N, though I'd say it firmly stands in the higher side of the B-list. I can shout Blaster Master into the wide open wind and someone will at least respond, "That's a video game." I rarely hear someone claim Blaster Master the greatest NES game of all time, but he at least shows up to the conversation of top tier NES games, which is more than I can say about a ton of shit on the system. Because of its popularity in America, the story of Blaster Master completely eclipsed MetaFight for a long time, and every subsequent work in the franchise took the Western market into account first. So before we get to the Zero trilogy, let's very briefly talk about the middle stuff. Now I'm gonna cut to the chase. Every Blaster Master project between the original game and the Zero trilogy is weird, alright, or kinda just plain bad. There's a short novel released by Scholastic, and then 5 games released on Genesis, Game Boy Color, PS1, and WiiWare. Gonna go a bit out of order here and start with the Genesis and Game Boy games since those won't take long. As Blaster Master was Sunsoft's most popular original IP, they tried a few times to get extra mileage out of it. First attempt was on the original Game Boy. Titled Blaster Master Jr. in Europe and then Blaster Master Boy in North America, the story is simple. The plutonium boss has come back and is causing more radiation underground. Jason is made aware and plans to teach him a new lesson, but oh shit, the hole became too small for Sophia to fit through. Without time to buy lube, he has to go down on foot with a fuck ton of powerful bombs and a dinky gun. Said gun isn't too important this time. Now it just freezes some enemies and eventually kills them if you keep shooting. Instead, you gotta focus on bomb usage. Bombs that you place directly onto a location and wait for them to explode, which also happens to blow off parts of the stage. Something that doesn't feel very Blaster Mastery, because it's not. In Japan, this was actually Bomber King Scenario 2, a sequel to a Bomberman spin-off titled Bomber King, which came to America as Robo Warrior. Since Sunsoft developed and published Burger King Scenario 2 and saw that Scenario 1 didn't release as a Bomberman game, they reskinned it with Blaster Master instead. And to be honest, by early Game Boy standards, it's actually pretty cool, though I'm definitely not touching it again if I'm looking for a Blaster Master experience. Now, if I want a Bomberman experience, yeah, I might come back to this, but that's not today.
Sunsoft was kind of just throwing shit at the wall with Blaster Master because it was their only game that did all right in America. Oh.
Moving to something I'm just flat out not playing again, Blaster Master 2. This is just a really bad Genesis game. Horrible enemy placement, not very fun physics, jank art style. Honestly, I wasn't having fun and turned it off quickly. It was developed by a European team and only released in America, maybe because they knew they didn't have time to make it good enough for their home continent. And yeah, maybe if I can really pull myself, I'll give it a second shot someday, but for now, I don't really care. Next on Game Boy Color was Blaster Master Enemy Below. The first in the series to come out in Japan after MetaFight, and the only one to retain the MetaFight branding as MetaFight EX, which means two stories again. In Japan, monsters are attacking the planet Theta some amount of decades after MetaFight, and Kane's descendant Leonardo Gardner needs to save the day. While in America, scientists were experimenting with the plutonium boss's DNA, they fucked up and made more mutants, so now Jason needs to fix the problem. Both are very simple plots that set up the very simple game. Enemy Below is essentially a Master Quest version of the original Blaster Master. Same level themes, ideas, upgrades, and so on, while the layouts have changed. If you like the original Blaster Master and want more levels with stiff Game Boy controls, screen crunch, and quickly respawning enemies, then I guess this is it for you. If I owned this on the Game Boy as a child, I can see myself getting a lot of mileage out of it during car rides and lunch at school, but today when I can play the NES games and Zero Trilogy on my Switch, which I usually keep up to the TV anyways, I'm not exactly in a hurry to play it. Enemy Below does have a password system at least, which is nice compared to the original entry, which had no continuation features. So yeah, that's something. Moving on, the interesting parts, starting with the novel. This novel, just titled Blaster Master, was part of Scholastic's Worlds of Power series, a series of 10 books that adapted the stories of NES games very loosely. By today's standards, they're essentially novelty items like a Mario cereal or the Double Dragon cartoon. Just a footnote for guys like me to bring up if we're making some kind of comprehensive history piece. However, the Blaster Master novel, and apparently Shadowgate, were the only two of these novelizations to have parts of their lore integrated into the games themselves. The Blaster Master novel was written by Peter Larangis under the pen name A.L. Singer. To my knowledge, he had zero information on the MetaFight version of the game. Everything he wrote expanded on the Western lore. For examples of what he added, Fred escaped from Jason's house seemingly due to some kind of mind control by the plutonium boss. Jason's new friend Alex got stuck in the underground 2 weeks prior. The plutonium boss is an alien, mutated the underground through space science, and he's hyper intelligent. Some of the mutants are mutated Earth animals, while some are aliens, and most importantly, Larangis introduced a new character named Eve. Eve is a young alien from the planet Signar L, a peaceful planet that was destroyed by the plutonium boss while she was using Sophia III to explore alien life, which incidentally led Plutonium Boss to Earth, explaining what the alien mutants are doing here, why Sophia III is in a cave, who taught Jason how to pilot Sophia, and just gives Jason someone to talk to until she gets kidnapped around the middle. At which point he rescues his friend Alex, they fight through the stages, kill a mutated Fred, save Eve, stop the mutant threat, Fred is alive again, Alex's family adopts Eve because they're Trekkies, everything ends happily ever after. And you know, by the standards I had for this book, it's actually pretty good, though still nothing amazing. I think the most interesting part about it is how they introduce some sci-fi MetaFight elements despite Larangis having no knowledge of it. And his additions would then be acknowledged in the PlayStation 1 game Blaster Master Blasting Away. So Blasting Away is a full-ass sized PS1 game that brought the series into 3D. Because of that, I didn't play a lot of it for this video in particular, but the parts that are relevant for Zero are told to us in the intro. From what I played, I feel as though this is a game worthy of discussion, so I'll probably come back to it at a later date. I don't know if it's for a video or myself, but hey, it has my attention. Now for what's important, Eve has been implemented into the main game storyline. She eventually married Jason, had 2 kids named Roddy and Elfie. Jason sacrificed himself during another fight against the mutant alien plutonium boss. Eve died when Roddy and Elfie were 9, and Roddy has become the new pilot of Sophia III, while Elfie is his navigator, meaning they implemented all the sci-fi stuff. I don't know if there's any big twists in the middle, but to my knowledge, that's not at all relevant to the Zero games. If any viewers have actually given this one a good chunk of playtime, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And for branding, this was the first game released in Japan under the Blaster Master title, where it completely adopted the American narrative of Jason and the mutants rather than Kane and the aliens. Moving back to behind the scenes real life stuff, Sunsoft hit a huge rough patch at the start of the 5th generation of consoles. The massive leap in technology was too much for the staff to grasp a hold of, and the American branch laid off almost everyone due to a bad golf course investment in Palm Springs. As such, they mainly became a publisher of other companies' games, while only developing a few games themselves all the way up until now. A majority of what they developed were ports of their previous games, which isn't a lot since their primary money makers back in the day were WB licensed games, and re-releasing retro licensed games is kinda hard. Honestly, it's amazing that Capcom made that happen with Disney. Virtual Mahjong on a few platforms, flip phone games, and their re-releases, especially on Wii's Virtual Console, kept the Japanese side of the company from going completely under, but according to Yoshiaki Iwata, the lead designer and programmer on the original MetaFight, the Japanese side had as few as 4 employees during certain periods of time. Sunsoft wasn't exactly the top dog even in their heyday, but man, that's a huge step down. They attempted one more Blaster Master reboot with Yoshiaki on WiiWare in 2010, but that got some really mixed reception. It didn't have Jason, the colors were drab, which didn't stick out from other bleak reboots of the era, and the controls felt sluggish compared to the original. Sunsoft hoped that it would revitalize their brand in the West, but that was very far from the results. It would be dramatic if I could say this killed the Sunsoft brand even more, but that would imply that Sunsoft had any kind of brand or identity to lose. Alright, it's finally time to get to the up and up portion of the video. While Sunsoft themselves hardly scraped by, retro gaming as a whole gained steam in the late 2000s and early 2010s. The internet, cheap compilations, and the virtual console made access to old titles easier than ever before, while affordable download titles carved a space for retro throwback games. It's then during this time that Inti Creates picked up steam with their original game series, Gunvolt, which from this point on, I'm gonna treat y'all as though you've already watched my Gunvolt retrospectives. I went in depth with some of the history there, and I see no point in reiterating that. Like honestly, main reason I'm making this whole video is because it's my second most requested topic from subscribers, bonus points if you can guess what the most requested is. I also made a part 2, but everything I talk about there is chronologically after today's subject, so you can save it for later if you'd like. Self-promotion behind us, during Gunvolt 2's development around late 2014, early 2015, our boy Takuya Aizu, president of Inti Creates, got a call from the president of Sunsoft asking if Inti could help to develop a new Blaster Master game. Since Inti was busy with Gunvolt, Mighty No. 9, and a few other minor projects, Aizu told him, "We'll consider it." Which in Aizu's words, not mine, is the Japanese business equivalent of no. So that could have been that if it weren't for a chance encounter at E3 2015. Now the story was told in a few different ways from interviews, but that's because both Aizu and Inti's lead of localization, Matt Papa, have told different bits and pieces, so I'll go over the basic gist of it. Aizu and a few other Inti staff, including Matt Papa, went to E3 2015. As Aizu doesn't speak English, he needed Matt to translate everything, including his interviews and meetings. However, Matt suffered a horrible back problem on day 2, necessitating a cancellation of anything that would have required his translations, meaning Aizu had to walk around by himself. As the day goes on, Aizu found a representative from Sunsoft having issues getting through security. The rep had the wrong clearance badge, which meant he was gonna be late for an interview with a rep from Nintendo. As a good Samaritan, Aizu flashed his badge and got him in, thinking it would stop there with no mention of Blaster Master. But then he stops by the cafe where that meeting happened to be taking place. Aizu noticed it's going poorly since the Nintendo rep had little faith in Sunsoft, prompting Aizu to step in to ask if he can assist. And within a few minutes, the Nintendo rep decided that Inti Creates is rebooting Blaster Master. An absolutely bonkers story completely decided by chance. After E3, Aizu went back to Japan and now had the new job of figuring out who was on the team for the new Blaster Master project. For reference, Gunvolt 2 wasn't done yet, so he couldn't make the leads there immediately divert focus onto Blaster Master. He ended up picking Satoru Nishizawa as the director, a moderately experienced staff member at Inti that was a huge fan of all things MetaFight and Blaster Master. With Nishizawa's passion and Aizu's probable guilt of taking on an extra project, the two of them started making sure the rest of the staff, mostly younger, got familiar with the original Blaster Master, aiming to make them into #1 fans of it so that everyone could get on the same page with bringing it to the modern age. And with his first goal, Nishizawa set out to restart the series completely from point zero, implement aspects from MetaFight, Blaster Master NES, and parts of the lore introduced in subsequent Blaster Master material, a goal the team at Inti Creates accomplished masterfully over the trilogy. Inti Creates spent about a year developing Blaster Master Zero for the 3DS. Looking at the work itself and reading staff interviews, it's clear to me that they had a fairly optimal workflow. They made it using Inti's own internal engine, an engine which, as you may expect, every employee at Inti Creates already had proficiency in. Additionally, around the ballpark of 75% of the side-scrolling maps are nearly identical to the NES game's layout. I'm not going to compare them one-to-one yet, I'll get to the nitty-gritty later, but they absolutely tried their best to either stay the exact same or replicate the feeling in each area, implying again that they didn't use too many workdays on some maps, and that they probably didn't expect this to kickstart a trilogy. It feels to me like they intended for an all-regions friendly remake of Blaster Master / MetaFight, which just so happened to gain 2 sequels. And on the topic of things just so happening, the Nintendo Switch came out, which was probably the best luck for Blaster Master Zero. While Inti only planned a 3DS version at first, Nintendo announced the Switch early enough into development where Inti could develop a version for Switch as well. Inti Creates had a pretty good relationship with Nintendo, so procuring a dev kit wasn't hard, and since they made the basic retro-style game with their in-house engine, the port didn't take too much manpower to get going. In terms of generating sales, I think this was the luckiest moment Inti could have had. A common citation for why Gunvolt 2 didn't sell much on launch was because it released exclusively as a 3DS download title in 2016. So having an inexpensive download title ready for Switch during the launch window was a huge win for Inti. Tons of people bought Blaster Master Zero at launch because it was just simply one of their options. I even have 2 friends that played it at launch, yet haven't played the sequels yet, so maybe we'll see if I can get them on that after this video. Zero One mainly follows the basic outline of the Western Blaster Master game and Worlds of Power novel, with sci-fi elements reminiscent of MetaFight thrown in. Sometime in the near future, the Earth succumbed to a new ice age due to the pollution and wars caused by man. To stay safe, humanity buried themselves underground where they studied ways to save the Earth's greenery in hopes of restoring it once the ice age ceased. And thankfully, they got pretty good at the tech they were working on. They made it back up to the surface safe and sound, and even when a super powerful, mega scary, totally not plot important meteor hit the Earth, humanity brushed it off. They had a completely normal life on the surface, with even better technology than they went down with. Then cut to a few hundred years later and we have a fully grown adult robotics engineer named Jason. One day, while conducting research, he spots a weird frog-like creature he'd never seen before. As a science man hungry for knowledge, he takes the creature home to his smart boy lab to study under the new name Fred. After observing Fred for a while, the creature escapes containment to guide Jason towards a strange portal that opens up in the ground. A portal Jason jumps into after Fred to find himself deep underground with no Fred. All he finds is a giant tank with the words Sophia the Third written on the side. Jason then hops into the tank to scour the underground for his frog. An underground filled with man-made environments built by humans hundreds of years ago. But no longer do humans inhabit them, as they now house alien mutants that, as you can guess, came from the meteor mentioned in the intro. They don't spell that out until later, but I think you can put the parts together. Off the bat, y'all can tell this is for sure a reimagining of the original Blaster Master, not a sequel or even a prequel like a Zero usually implies. And personally, I'd say this is the best version of the setup. It still has the surreal parts of the American version, like an underground tank, a jumpy frog, and an entire world down under, but now instead of explaining it with "That's New York, baby!" we have real lore and comic science behind it all. Even the weird part of, oh, how did Jason Long Island suddenly pilot a fucking tank, is partially justified by his genius level intellect in robot engineering. He also occasionally chimes in during the first part of the game to say, oof, still getting the hang of this, which, you know, doesn't right away the absurdity of guy with no tank experience suddenly drives tank, but it at least levels the scenario to partial reality. And eventually in Blaster Master Zero 3, they show that the tanks have built-in tutorials, so I guess Jason just had those running for a while. Either way, if you're looking for a story grounded in reality, maybe just turn back. Just like the NES title, you have two different gameplay styles. Sophia the Third's side-scrolling, non-linear shooty action, and Jason's slower, top-down dungeon crawling. When it comes to the bare essentials, these both use the same spine as the original with a plethora of quality of life changes to make the experience more palpable to modern standards. To explain what they change, I need to go back and talk about stuff in the original I didn't get to yet. Sophia originally started out with nothing but the basic gun and empty ammo slots for all three of its weapons, including a homing rocket, a forward rocket, and a downward electric strike. You'd pick one of the three in the pause menu and then press down plus attack to use them. Not exactly the most convenient way to use sub-weapons since the gameplay can get fast, though I get why that's the case. You only got 4 buttons to work with and all of them had a more demanding use. The main issue with it is that it meant you couldn't aim the non-homing rockets upwards. And honestly, it wasn't too bad in the original. The tank segments weren't really the hardest parts out there. Due to Sophia's loose physics, especially when jumping or hovering, it expected you to take a lot of hits, so the health drop rate from enemies is noticeably high. A drop rate which applies to pretty much every Blaster Master in my experience. Back to Zero, the first thing you'll notice is the overhaul to Sophia's sub-weapons. In the original game, you had a separate ammo for each sub-weapon, a hover meter, and a health meter. Here in Zero, you just have 2 meters to worry about, health and blue meter. Your blue meter accounts for just about everything in Zero. Hover, sub-weapons, the new charge shots, the new multi-jump, literally anything other than shooting and jumping requires blue meter. Honestly, it's a bit daunting at first, but since the meter refills over time slowly, and mutants drop blue capsules only a little less often than the green capsules, it's not too bad in 0-1. Recovering hover meter and sub-weapon ammo was way scarier in the original, where your best bet was the on-foot Jason segments. Speaking of, those are interwoven significantly better with the tank portions. Like, before talking about the improvements to Jason, let's talk about the ways these connect. I mentioned earlier how the on-foot segments often led to dead ends in the NES game. With the limited continues and hard to level backup gun, it was pretty disappointing when you travel down a long dungeon just to come out with even less than you entered with. That issue is mitigated in Zero. There's still 1 or 2 times when a cave has nothing important in there, but a majority of them have new collectibles inside. Main movement upgrades like the dive function, wall climb, and hover are still gained from the main bosses, but now going through the caves without bosses can net you new sub-weapons, unique charge shots that open up new pathways, increases to your health and blue bars, alternate bomb options for Jason on foot, and perhaps most useful, maps. Back in the original, like the few other non-linear games of the time, you didn't have a map. You had to memorize the layout yourself. Assuming you don't have the manual at least. That actually had maps for 5 of the 8 stages in it. Your map functions about identical to other staples of the Metroidvania genre. You start filling in blocks on your own by walking around, and once you find the map, everywhere you haven't gone becomes a grayed out square, so you know what you missed. You can also see icons for what spots in the side-scrolling parts have items to find, and which caves still have items. Having the maps is a great addition, and Inti was pretty smart with letting you know that maps are here. Inti strategically hid the first one down here in the first cave that you totally shouldn't miss thanks to this obvious ladder. Like, you'd have to be a fucking idiot. Yeah, don't worry, I went back later. For the new tank upgrades, some of these are pretty dang cool. For example, on the NES, the lightning weapon did this weird curving thing that made it tough to hit what was below you, even when stationary, while now it's just a simple, straight downward electric attack. If you're good with it, you can hit 2 or 3 enemies at once, which, thanks to Zero having way more buttons to work with, the sub-weapons have a dedicated button letting you aim the normal rockets up or even diagonally, since that gets its own button now too. By having a dedicated button, it kind of just naturally buffs all of them, since using them in tandem with your normal shot is easier than ever. In addition to that, you can easily swap both your charge shot and sub-weapon by holding L to open a drop-down menu rather than pausing like in the original. Now for brand new sub-weapons, there's a lighting dash attack that lets you ram enemies and a plasma shield you can place on the ground. Both of these are really good for enemies low to the floor. Like, there's a couple of parts where you have a bunch of tiny enemies swarm towards you. If you don't place the shield down, then you'd get tons of tiny damage done to you, while with the shield you can watch them all walk into it like flies to a bright light. Now the charge shots, in 0-1 at least, are kinda hit or miss. There's a laser that passes through walls and can shoot enemies or blocks in a row, another with a slightly taller hurt box, a cannon shot that blows a bunch of shit up, and the last one, let's wait because of spoilers. Since they take a few seconds to charge and cost blue meter, I didn't end up using them for combat very often. The first two don't deal much more damage than the base weapon, and the cannon shot has a blast radius that can hurt you, so using it in tighter corridors is risky. Not Not to say they're useless though. Actually, they're pretty good for unlocking alternate paths, which I guess is as good a time to get into the map design. Just like the old one, there's 8 separate maps to explore. But this time, like I said, you have full incentive to discover everything due to the possibility of your health upgrades, guns, yada yada. A majority of these 8 follow the same level theming as the NES title, and pretty often they'll have layouts that are almost identical like Area 1, or an expansion on what the original gave. Let's take Area 2 as an example. On NES, it was a dark brown, primarily vertical castle or museum looking stage with pools of what I assume is lava and small enemies that can surprise you. Your main goal here was to fight the boss to receive the gun upgrade that breaks specific blocks so you could travel back and open a new path that required that specific gun. Zero's Area 2 follows the same basic formula, but with minor quality of life and aesthetic changes to make it clear. First and most obviously, you have a map and radar that kind of tells you, yo, you should go this way. And even if it didn't give you those icons, on your very first visit to Area 2, it's pretty straightforward. Since it's a majority vertical and you don't have the hover yet, you only have a few options on where to go. So it'll point you towards Cave 1, Cave 2, and so on and so forth. Though honestly, what might help the most here is the modern graphics. I mean, yeah, obviously it's sprite-based and has a retro feeling, but we all know that the amount of colors and visual effects here were not possible on NES. The old version was gray, with gray enemies on a greenish background. Those enemies also popped in a little late so they can blindside you, and some of them were tiny dudes that just fucking ram you. Thankfully, Zero's graphical overhaul makes all of that a non-issue. No more poppin', widescreen lets you see what's coming up, and way more colors due to a setting change. Rather than a castle-esque thing, it's some kind of abandoned research lab with white broken walls and purple ooze rather than lava, which to be honest fits the scenario way better. A medieval-looking castle did not make sense in MetaFight's original sci-fi future scenario. Enemy placement itself additionally becomes more suitable to a second area. As an example, we've got these gooped up worms. You'll kinda think you should use the electricity on, and since they're inside the goop, you'll learn that using the electricity on a liquid disperses the electricity further, assuming you hadn't already learned that in level 1. It's a little lesson you'll keep in your head for later in Area 5 when you go fully underwater. It's some thoughtful layouts that every area has, and you'd kind of expect from Inti Creates at this point. I can't think of any bullshit blindsiding moments like I can with the original, and even when there was something semi-cheap, health was pretty close by. Like, to be honest, there's times when it could feel a bit too easy. I get some people might not like that, though I don't care too much. It's not like the tank segments were that difficult on NES, and about half the stages get a lot more focused on your exploration and item collection through the use of your upgrades. Most notably with the hover and new multi-jump. Like the original, you had a hover meter that you could only recharge if you found 8 circles from enemy drops or in caves, which meant that you had to conserve hover whenever possible. Now that your hover ability is based on your blue meter, which recharges over time and has numerous drops from enemies, the level designers are able to distance platforms more often, placed in very natural ways such as a platform lying just slightly above a normal jump. The movement upgrades and how they interact with specific stage gimmicks are neat ways to help Sophia feel like she's improving as you progress. So in Area 3, the main gimmicks are these conveyor belts that raise or lower the platforms. When you first get here, it's pretty standard stuff, where after you run on the conveyor belt, you run through to pass the platform before they return to their initial position. There's only 2 oddball platforms here. One that leads to a platform you can't reach, and another with a conveyor belt that's on the wall. Now, Area 3 is where you get the hover, so that tall platform is used as a way to get you back to Area 3's entrance quickly, while the conveyor belt on the wall is used to taunt you until way later when you have the wall climb. By the point when you got the hover, the rest of Area 3 is probably complete. So now you've got to travel all the way back to the tall wall in Area 1 to reach the new Area 4, which means that you're forced to have a chance at re-evaluating the extremely vertical Area 2. And by doing as such, you're rewarded with new items like the homing missile. All of this is fucking rad, especially with context of the original game. In that one, you still had this long backtrack to Area 1, but there was nothing to indicate that Area 3 was complete in-game unless you had the manual. And then Area 6, it's such a cool improvement over the original. The old one was one of the shorter stages with a really slippery ice physics. I took one quick glance at the map, saw it go up and right the whole time, and got to the boss quickly. For Zero's Area 6, once you get here, you've got to spend tons of time breaking ice blocks and dancing around these 4 pointed stars that block most paths. You see all these squares you want to go towards, but can't because of the blocks, or really don't want to bother yet because it'll take a bit. Then around the middle, you get the cannon shot I mentioned earlier. It totally trivializes breaking blocks. blocks. One shot and out goes everything in the way. I know I said that I didn't use the cannon much for combat, but for traversing areas 6 through 8, which have breakable blocks aplenty, it became my go-to charge shot for the remainder of the game. And honestly, I could gush about other parts I loved in the tank segments if I wanted to, as there's not a single part of it I disliked, and my only nitpicks I didn't notice too much until I played 0, 2, and 3, which fixed them, so I may as well wait until then to say what they were. With the exception of remapping everything to have its own button and adding more weapons, the tank parts were already up to par for a modern retro style game. The original Jason portions, honestly not as much. I think they were fine for the time, and I still have fun jumping in with the mindset of this was made in the 80s, but man, I don't think you could have sold this to me for $15 today. So I'm glad to see that the top-down portions got an extreme overhaul. Our Long Island boy got a full fucking glow up. Before anything else, let's start buttons. As the trilogy goes on, more of these are gonna get used for Jason, but for now, you actually only use 4 of them. Y to shoot your shot, A for bombs, L to open the same drop-down menu Sophia had, and hold R to strafe. Here's where I'm a fucking idiot. 0-1 doesn't really tell you that you can strafe besides right here on the options menu. If you look closely to see, it says something like press to change direction of Jason. It didn't do anything when I pressed it when I booted up the game, leading me to stop trying. So I didn't know you could strafe in 0-1, and in my initial notes, I actually wrote that adding a strafe was 0-2's best addition because it actually tells you about it. Not a real critical point to this, just letting everyone know I'm a fucking idiot to explain why I never strafed in 0-1. Anyways, the basics are the same. Run around to fight enemies, pick up pink capsules to upgrade your gun, use grenades for big damage, the big upgrades are usually at the end, and like I said, now almost every cave has something of worth. So for Jason's gun, it still follows the idea of upgrade it with the capsules, but now not every upgrade is a direct improvement over the last. Most of them have a specific use that the others don't, and as such, you can cycle through them with the drop-down menu as long as you're up to that weapon level. And I do want to point out how I stressed most of them, because the lowest few are still pretty weak, and for normal, no gimmick combat, you want to stick with the highest level gun. Which yeah, for a basic ass reward for playing good type stuff, that makes sense. Real quick, going down the list, we've got the basic bitch boy shot, the upgraded basic bitch boy shot, the stronger one that shoots through walls, bread shot, a shield that reflects bullets, the flamethrower that places a burn status on enemies and melts icy floors and blocks, electric shock that shocks everything close to what you hit for moderate damage, and the best level 8 weapon that shoots through walls, can rapid fire, and is very large. I think from my baseline descriptions alone, you can already guess how some of these have more uses than others. Level 3 is good for enemies in tricky situations, right past a wall, electricity for rooms of many guys, you get the idea. The gun's functions are not the newest ideas on the block, we've all seen a reflector and a flamethrower before. The main appeal of these is how each shot type interacts with the various level designs, and your challenge is maintaining the highest levels for the bosses. Because for a majority of them, you want the electricity or the max level shots, which is as good a time as any to talk about the cave designs. Back on NES, the caves didn't have much variety. It was really just a walk to the end with a lot of easy to walk around spikes and a little bit of ice in Area 6, which was fine because as it was already pushing the NES graphically for that year, it didn't need anything fancy. And also there were enemies everywhere. Extra hazards would have been too much. Now at 0, every area has some gimmick in the on-foot segments to set each apart from the rest. For example, back in stage 3, you had the conveyor belts to change platforms. Well, now in the top-down section, you have conveyor belts moving Jason. Then in Area 5, the underwater level, you have these moving platforms that look kinda like what you'd see on an oil rig. You wait around for them to come towards you, and then you need to time when you move to the next. I think the biggest standout was with Area 7. In both the side-scrolling and Jason segments, the focus is on stealth. When playing as Sophia, getting caught isn't the worst thing in the world because you're pretty overpowered by then, but on foot, once you're seen, you can get fucked up. Guard robots take way too many hits to take down, so it forces you to rethink how you treat enemies. Which is cool since besides here in level 6 with the ice, you can basically just go unga bunga with the level 8 gun. Enough of that, I guess I'll get into a few, I don't know if I'd say problems, but rough spots with the on-foot segments. Before I say this, I want to preface, these really weren't that big of a deal to me when playing the game originally. It's just that after experiencing 0-2 and 0-3, these stuck out a lot. First and least important, Jason's walk speed is a little slow in this one. Or I guess more so he doesn't have an option to speed up like he does in 0, 2, and 3. You have your basic walk speed And that's it. I'll explain how 2 and 3 improve this when we get there. Narratively, it serves a purpose since he's scared and more cautious in 1 while he's experienced in 2 and 3, but it's still a little annoying. The bigger deal that undercuts all of Jason's various options is that it's very easy to keep your gun at level 8. There's a lot of parts where it feels like it wants you to test things like the reflector, but since that takes a minute to set up while the best shot doesn't, I don't really bother with the reflector. And what makes it super easy to keep up is the new energy guard. How this works is that once you find it, you can take 1 extra hit before you start losing gun levels. And after a short amount of time, that level goes back up. With the energy guard, a moment from a single trap that would have dropped you down once isn't too detrimental. And even when you do drop down, the pink energy drops are really high in this first game. It gives me this feeling that the developers noticed just how brutal the old NES title was and balanced a little too much on the easy side for this one. Now also in its defense, you can self-impose your own challenges. The energy guard can be turned off and you can say something like no level 8 shots. I think next time I replay 0-1, I'll probably at least turn off the guard. Though I still want to stress, it didn't bother me much when I initially played it. I just feel it's worth mentioning since 0-2 and especially 0-3 balanced this better. Like in 0-1, I didn't even really use the new upgrades to the sub-weapons outside of bosses. And even though I didn't use those too much in 0-1, most of them kind of stick throughout the trilogy, so let's go over that. As a reminder, the original Blaster Master just had 1 grenade type mapped to A that you had an infinite amount of. It did more damage than your normal shot, but could only hit at a specific range. So while you can spam it at specific points, if an enemy is moving, it's kinda risky to use. The Zero series makes them a bit more like the sub-weapon Sophia had in the original. You have a few you can pick from, and each has their own ammo count. 0-1 has the normal grenades returning from the original, which functions the same, only with a ammo count of 10, a new landmine that you place with 1 button press and ignite with a second, a flash bomb which blinds all enemies, the turret you can place and have it randomly shoot more bullets at enemies, and the super big Sophia screen nuke where you remotely call Sophia to nuke everything. Outside of bosses, it's kinda hard to justify using most of these over the level 8 gun. With the turret and the landmine, if you place it down, by the time it kills an enemy, you could have already shot it with the blaster rifle, which is likely at a high level. And for the flash grenades, I mainly use those during the stealth segments. It gives you about 5 seconds to run through the guards, which means you can make it past at least 2 or so before you need to be stealthy again. I like the idea they have with the new sub-weapons for Jason, but I don't feel like they hit their full potential in this first game, which is about how I feel with the top-down portions as a whole. It's such a great reimagining of the original game's mechanics, I just feel like it could be even better, which after playing the whole trilogy, I know it achieved that, which makes it kind of weird for me to look at 0-1 again. I recall the memory of having fun while playing it, and honestly if I turn it on now, I still do have fun, but man, 0-2 and 3 improve on it so much. Now I don't want to end by saying that with a gameplay of 0-1, so I saved the best parts for last, the bosses. Inti Creates, as a developer just across the board, always impresses me with their boss fights. From the ball-busting score killers of Gunvolt to the intimidating monsters from Curse of the Moon, I am always interested to see what they've got cooking. For Blaster Master Zero, they certainly didn't disappoint, especially in the quantity department. In addition to the normal end of area bosses, we have a shit ton of mid-bosses, and many dungeons with an item have an additional enemy gauntlet room to end on if they don't have a boss. And what's coolest about these ones is that they're the main part we'll use other weapons against normal enemies, though by other weapons I mostly mean the electric shot and turrets. Since the enemies close in on you like walls, a perfectly centered turret can get some damage on them before they come close, and the electricity, yeah, it kind of speaks for itself. And then for the actual bosses, we've got a cool mix of reinventions of the old NES bosses and brand new ones. Brand new ones that follow the original theming pretty well. I didn't quite realize this until I read the novel. A majority of the original bosses follow a trend of small, semi-aquatic animals turning fucked up. We've got the new laser salamander, the triggy you need to push back, whatever these things are. I thought they looked like kabutops. Bosses fitting in with the original's vision. And I kind of wonder if these types of bosses are what inspired the whole New York sewers angle in the OG. With the prominence of Ninja Turtles in the 80s, I can assume they looked at the frog boss and thought, oh fuck, let's do sewers. Now, unlike the original that was always black background with the strat of shoot basic shot with an occasional grenade and don't get hit, Zero makes everyone unique with their own attacks, patterns, and stage designs. For example, in Area 1 you have the capsule-shaped drap trappers. These guys fly by and place bombs down that limit where you can walk and aim. However, since they don't blow up until the third capsule flies by, you have a shoot to disarm a few of them with your attacks. You could technically just shoot them all at once with the electric shock, but then you lose your chance to do damage to the actual boss, since the electric shock don't do much to them, and some other weapons stun them for you to get big bullet time on them, which is a cool way for you to think about this boss. I mean, it's intended as the very first mid-boss technically, so doing what I said is super easy, but hey, it's the thought that counts. There's also those Kabutops looking dudes where the most logical choice is, again, use the electric shock to hit both at once when they pop out of the goop, but when you're directly up in their face, you're at risk of getting hit by their pink sludge depending on where they face. So you might do some hits with the electricity, and if the angle's not right, hit them with a long, fast-ranged weapon instead. Now, for Jason, what I'd say is the standout boss, and I think Inti knew this too, was the hard shell crab. It's the main boss of Area 6, and even the build-up is ominous. Jason had to swim far away from Sophia to find a dive gear for it, so he's already far away from safety. And as you approach it, you see the silhouette of something big destroy another big monster with a blood effect going on. Approaching this point reminds you of Jason's situation as a small dude up against large monsters. And once you reach him, he's tough to get through. He has a shield on the front that's hard to break through, so if you lose the level 8 gun, like I did, you need to think pretty hard on how to hit him. Only one other weapon goes through the shield, and it doesn't do much damage or stun him for long. As I couldn't attack him head on, this is when I made the most use of the detonator bombs, dropping them where I'd expect him to walk to and blowing them up there. You've got to predict a lot here with how he walks, which attack he uses, and I'd say this is the standout boss, especially for the monster-based ones. A few others like Mother Brain and the Spark Salamander are kinda just spam the weapon, so Krabby here was a cool change of pace. Anyway, let's move over to the coolest shit they added: bosses inside the tank. Something that's surprisingly lacking in every Blaster Master game are boss fights in the tank. And you know, I get it, have Jason get out of the safety of his tank to fight something big and scary, it has the cool narrative to it, but also, the standard for 2D platformer bosses was already set with Castlevania and Mega Man by MetaFight's release. You'd think one or two would make it in, even if they weren't up to par with the examples I gave. Or maybe a sequel would have a tank fight. Like, fighting a giant monster in a mecha or tank is hype as hell. Gold Lighton already scientifically proved that. But no, unless they're somewhere late in one of the other games, Zero's the first time in a Blaster Master entry where we have tank bosses. And as an introduction, I'd say it's done well. There's only 4 of them, and that makes it feel all the more grand. First one we have is this totally new mutated gear boss. You fight him a little after you get the laser that goes through walls, and immediately after nabbing the hover. His design's super grotesque with a giant red eye that, as you can guess, is his weak point. You can only hit it if you shoot right through his tiny bullet hole, which is where the trick comes in. Do you carefully use your hover to properly aim in there, or haphazardly use up blue meter to shoot directly through his gear walls? One method requires patience for the blue meter to build back up, while the other needs more skill from the player's part to pull off. And there's this other one that really pulls off both the hype tanking and the fearful Jason aura. So when you first walk by this part of Area 7, Jason's on foot trying to get Sophia closer to him. And what do you find? A giant fucking skeleton dragon. One hit from this thing fucks you up, and since you need to jump on some high platforms to save Sophia, taking a hit on these ensures fall damage will kill you. First time I ever fought this dude, I got nervous here and fell down a few times. He's menacing, but once you get Sophia, it turns to hype, because by now, you've likely unlocked Sophia's final weapon, a giant fuck you laser that consumes your whole blue meter. Use that on the dragon skeleton and it's over for him. It means he's not that hard, but from a thematic and hype sense, it's awesome. I absolutely love these bosses and I can't wait to talk about the ones in 0, 2, and 3. Alright. Time to finally return to the story. I mentioned how Area 2 is when the setting more obviously changes from the old version with the research lab rather than the castle, and it's also when the plotline gets shaken up. You know, like actually having a story. Once you beat the mid-boss, Jason finds an amnesiac blonde girl laying alone in the next room. For a reason unknown to Jason, his blaster rifle woke her up, and she has perfect knowledge of how to fix and operate on Sophia, making it clear that her past is connected to the funny cave tank somehow. This girl's name is Eve, a very similar Eve to the one from the novel, but with a few changes we'll get to. One that's already obvious is her being blonde. In the book, they say she's a redhead, one time near the beginning. Perhaps her blonde hair is important somehow. Anyway, as a thanks to Jason, and because they're stuck in the underground, she decides to go with him on his search for Fred. And she actually breathes a lot of life into the adventure. Jason has someone to talk to in cutscenes, give information on bosses, and you can even talk to her on the pause menu whenever you want. Even if most of what she says is tutorials, I still like it. It makes Jason not feel as lonely when he's in the tank, and also more lonely when he's outside of it. If Jason were to dive in a cave, he has someone to let down other than Fred, a greater purpose than he had in the original. Even one scene has the two lose connection, and you can tell how much they care for each other here. His first thought is, shit, is she okay? Jason cares about her a lot, and I totes get it. He, some random ass dude, woke up a bombshell, said, oh yeah, I saved you, now I gotta save my frog, wanna help? And she joins him? Jason's gotta know he can't fumble this. Now, companionship is pretty much all she provides in until Area 6. They find Fred here, and he is seriously injured. A bunch of electricity popping out of him and visible mechanic parts. Maybe it's in his diet. Now that Jason has Fred back, he can start with his new mutantless goal,
get out of there,
which doesn't last long. Progress through a bit more of Area 6, and Eve gets her exposition back, gets her memories back. As it turns out, she's an alien android from the planet Sophia, a planet once ravaged by alien mutants. Aliens that burrowed deep underground to eat up a planet's resources after they landed there on comets. Oh shit, let's talk about the intro again, remember that? On planet Sophia, the top scientists created a series of vehicles to stop the mutants, and once they eradicated them on planet Sophia, they sent said vehicles out to other planets in need. With each, they added an animalistic support droid and a humanoid support droid, both to assist someone in piloting the vehicle. In this case, Fred and Eve are the droids, while Sophia is the vehicle. With memories back and exposition given, Eve plans to finish the fight against the mutants without Jason, but after all he's been through with her, he promises to go to the very end with her. From then on, it follows what you'd expect. Jason and Eve finish through Area 7 and 8, find the evil Emperor Gomez, an initially easy boss with a crazy phase 2. I ended up needing to abuse a lot of bombs to deal with him because his shots get scary. With Gomez dealt with, the gang returns to the surface to talk about a job well done. Mutants have left Earth, but not the galaxy. So Eve knocks out Jason to fly towards the mutant core with Sophia. All Jason could do was fall down and see a slight tear in her eye. Upon waking up, Jason finds that Fred stayed behind to open a new wormhole to give Jason a busted fucking new tank, Sophia Zero. With it, Jason and Fred take a new wormhole to the secret 9th area to save Eve. Now, I'm not gonna go into everything that makes Sophia Zero OP, just think of it like your endgame superform. Jason got all the Chaos Emeralds, and now he can dual wield floating Keyblades. Charge shots don't need to charge, every sub-weapon gets a boost, and your normal weapon deals more damage. It leads to a super fun final area that's not horribly long. Getting to the end, Jason finds out that Sophia the Third and Eve became corrupted by the mutant core. So now Jason needs to fight the Eve mutant core hybrid both on foot and in the new Sophia Zero, which for easy as it can be in Sophia Zero, it's totally peak when midway through the tank part, Jason swoops in to remove Eve from the cockpit and then finishes the old Sophia off. After it's all over, Eve is feeling a bit bummed out about the whole being mutated thing. Jason's just happy to have saved her, but she feels bad about it. There is one thing that makes her happy though, and it's a letter from her parents found in Sophia Zero. It says that they sent Sophia Zero to Earth so she could take on the mutant threats. Maybe they knew Sophia the Third wasn't strong enough for it, but who knows. The important part here is the names attached: Kane Gardner and Jennifer Gardner. And if you recall from like an hour ago, Kane Gardner and Jennifer Cornett were the main characters in MetaFight, meaning that they eventually got married, and Blaster Master Zero is actually a sequel to MetaFight. Honestly, the whole story of Zero is such a wonderful case study for mixing together two contrasting regional variants to a game. The Japanese version is canonically a prequel with pieces of its setting integrated here, while the American version forms the basis of the characters and plot outline. I fucking love what's here. And during the end, when Eve started thanking Jason, I did shed a few tears. It got to me. It made me very curious to see what the sequels had in store, especially since I heard many people talk about how the trilogy is peak Inti Creates. Well, I felt the first game had lots to improve on. And some will point out that there's a few extra modes in Blaster Master Zero 1 I haven't talked about yet, but I'm gonna wait until I talk about BMZ 2 for that. Let's just jump into a sequel that fixes every major problem I had with Blaster Master Zero. Zero 2 kicks off a few months after the first game ended. Jason, Eve, and Fred got to relax a bit on Earth, go to festivals, eat Eve's bad cooking, beach dates, listen to the official Blaster Master Zero soundtrack, all the peaceful things true warriors strive for. And then, one day, the mutant cells that once took over Eve's body in Zero 1 start to flare up, changing her body into a half-android, half-mutant. Jason searched the entirety of Earth, both on the surface and underground, yet all he could do was slow down the infection. With no other choices, his last bet is traversing all the way to Eve's home planet of Sophia in hopes that it may have a cure for her. Thus, he loads himself, Eve, and Fred up into the brand new spaceflight-capable Gaia Sophia that he and Eve were working on to reach her home. A setup leading to an interplanetary space adventure no longer tied to the limits of the original NES game. A journey with new planets with their own inhabitants every step of the way. Zero 1 was a traditional Metroidvania, if on the limited side. You could traverse each in the order and extent you pleased, though you needed to beat an area's boss to proceed to the next one. You didn't need to go backwards much since there was only like 2 times they rewarded you for coming back with a later area's ability, and normally it was when you needed to backtrack to get somewhere else. You could really just clear out an entire area during the story progression and then come back later. Zero 2 follows the formula that I see a lot of Metroidvanias do lately, where you have these small or medium-sized non-linear stages that you select from a screen or secondary room. Same as Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, Vernal Edge, or Inti's own Gal Guardians. You've got 7 brand new space sectors to explore with both a main planet, or spaceship in Area C's case, and many planetoids with a quick platforming or combat challenge to receive extra items. In comparison to Zero 1, I think this format fits. If each stage is already pretty much split up, then I think going the full way was the better option. Mostly because it makes going between each area far easier. I can leave this part of Area A unexplored and not dread passing through 3 other areas when I get what I need in Area E. I can just pass through a cool little outer space menu. And yet again, going between each main planet isn't needed too often here. With the exception of 2 fetch quests needed for the true ending, you can clean out a planet on your first go. You'll mostly go back to other space sectors for their planetoids. These pop up whenever you find a blue map that leads to the planetoids, and I think they're neat. I feel like this is where they wanted to put the harder stuff that they couldn't balance right with the main levels, such as mid-bosses and platforming segments with brutal penalties for fuck-ups. For example, this one you head to right after you unlock the wall jump, which replaces the wall drive. You've got to carefully jump between each spike on the wall to unlock a new bomb for Jason. One hit by one of these spikes, and you're likely gonna hit at least a second one on the way down due to the stun period. You can also try hovering if you want, but by the time you initially unlock it, your blue meter is definitely not big enough to make the whole distance. So essentially, you need to get good, and thankfully, the respawn point is right before it, meaning failure doesn't deter you much. There's even a couple where you jump out of Sophia for Jason to try his hand at platforming, and since fall damage is still here, I think you can guess what one slip up means. Normally they want you to use an item that you just unlocked in the main planet, and overall I think they're cool ways to make you use whatever item you got, especially when the reward is always worth it. Only things negative I can say about them is that they're kinda kinda samey looking visually. Green, blue, or occasionally red rocky area. Not a big deal, just worth mentioning because of how gorgeous the pixel art in the main stages are. But let's talk about Jason and Sophia's improvements first. Right off the bat, you can see we're not driving Sophia the Third anymore. It blew up last time. Nor do we have Sophia Zero, because that's too busted to start a game with. Or if you want the plot reason, Jason and Eve were pretty sure that Sophia Zero's OP ass would run out of energy before reaching planet Sophia. That's why Jason has the new Gaia Sophia, or G Sophia for short, which he'll keep for 03 as well. First minor adjustment, you now start with the dive gear and basically start with the hover as well. Like technically it's damage minute 1, but you find a new hover within 15 minutes, let's just count that as start with it. No more multi-jumping though, that's exclusive to 01 and I kinda miss it, but I'll admit I switched to the hover pretty quick. The triple missiles also do this fun crisscross that makes hitting singular enemies easier, and you can quick map 2 guns or sub-weapons to the trigger buttons, which is probably the best minor change that I'll get into once I talk sub-weapons. Our most important change to G Sophia is the new Gaia system. This totally reworks how your blue meter works. Blue meter no longer refills over time. Unless you find blue pills or perform an action to refill it, you used what you had. Thankfully, you have more options to refill blue meter, by either getting hit or landing from a tall height. So let's say you need some hover to get where you want to go. Back in 01, you had to just sit there for a minute while it charged. Now you can try to find a high point and jump up and off it a few times to speed up the process. And since the energy you gain scales with the height of your jump, you might just need to do it once. And before you ask, they did think about people abusing hover. Tapping the hover button anytime before landing minimizes the recovered blue meter. So yeah, you gotta know the stages. This simple sounding blue meter switch completely changes how you interact with the game. In a simple platformer, not one of your jumps lack any meaning. If there's a tiny platform in the way as you fall, that can be a hazard when you're low on blue meter, because it prevents you from getting it back. Now, during boss fights, if you're brave enough, you can try to jump off of any of the platforms that may be there, or wall jump from the top once you unlock that. However, it's not all a buff, because now if you totally run out of blue meter, Sophia becomes weak. Shots deal way less damage, I think you take more damage, and you can't use any blue meter requiring moves until it automatically recharges itself. This new blue meter system is genius. It leads to so many inventive ways to play each stage, as do the new sub-weapons. So back in 01, every sub-weapon was primarily an offensive maneuver. The only one that had an alternative use was the spark tackle, which I typically didn't use in 01 since switching over to it and using it took up more time than just blasting an enemy with something else. 02 adds in a lot of secondary effects or unique movement mechanics to the sub-weapons. First off, a new dashing maneuver with the burn spark. Technically it's the same as 01's dash, though I think it's a little faster and goes further. But that's not what makes it cool. What's cool is how you can put it onto a trigger button in the menu and actually make use of it in quick situations. Like, I want y'all to think of Mega Man Zero or Gunvolt for a minute. Dashing is an innate thing you do on the fly. You don't just equip dashing. And here, since the dash also hurts enemies, it's more comparable to Copen, where that's the main thing he does. It's something you know to use when a problem gets right up into your face and you have a split second to react. That's what the burn spark becomes in 0, 2, and 3. Plus it breaks walls and lets you go faster. Pairing that with the wall jump I mentioned earlier makes G Sophia legitimately feel like any other Inti Creates hero in tank form. And all the sub-weapons have that fast-paced appeal, especially when you can have 3 at once. Another close range is this AoE circle move that hits anything in its vicinity. It's not as strong as the burn spark or homing missiles, but if you've got like 4 small dudes on the other side of a wall, you can use it to take them out quickly, which is especially useful for enemies that throw smaller enemies at you. Oh, and then the drill. This shit's the bomb. It replaces the electricity as the downward attack, and it's so much better. Now Sophia drops directly down with a drill to kill whatever's under it, small blocks you couldn't before, and even leave a trail of rocks to deal damage to anything next to you. Personally, I had the drill on the right trigger and the dash on the left trigger after I unlocked the 2 of them. Having those both ready at a moment's notice made Sophia feel so agile. And having those 2 there additionally made it easier to hot swap what was mapped to the main sub-weapon button, since now I had way less to choose from. It's pretty clear from context which of the other sub-weapons I'd want turned on in a given moment, and there's only 3 regular shot types, so that needed even even less thinking. For those, I honestly didn't use the alternative 2 very often. Anyways, you no longer charge your shots. Now you equip the shot type, and it's what Jason shoots while they're equipped. You have the regular one, a faster machine gun bullet that goes through walls, and the big traditional tank shot that deals more damage to certain enemies. These extra 2 shots don't suck or anything, they're fine enough for doing what they're supposed to do, it's just that they still use blue meter when equipped, and I found the sub-weapons more worth my meter, so I avoided them when possible. I'd equip the big tank shot for bosses, and if there was a enemy behind a wall at a weird angle, then yeah, I'd use the machine gun. Though even with the machine gun, by the time I got it, I already had the lock-on missiles and shield move, so my niche of weapons that hit through walls already had 2 things to fill it, which isn't a big deal. I already had all those sub-weapons to make use of in the stages, which brings us to the main levels. 0-2 technically has less areas than 0-1, though personally I feel like they're more memorable, and besides the first area that's a short tutorial type stage, they're all bigger than 0-1's areas and have a more natural flow in their design, which, is partially because they could make something totally original rather than stick close to an NES era design. Let's use the second area, Planet Montage, as an example. This world is based on a traditional old-timey Japanese aesthetic, specifically the one seen in the Japan-only Sunsoft game Iki. Here you need to find ways to maneuver around bamboo that suddenly shoots out from the walls and floors. As the right side is completely blocked off by bamboo, you start by going left to get practice dealing with it. Then, after you receive the wall jump from the inhabitants and have practice dodging bamboo, it spits you back out to the center of the world. Now, you're ready to head towards the large portion of the stage on the right side. And this side's actually pretty short, as long as you know how to get through the bamboo. I don't just mean float and jump around it either. Tons of enemies lay right behind the bamboo shoots, and they can attack from the other side, so now you're making use of your new fancy weapons. Then Area C, the spaceship you board, is an even better example. Initially, this is very linear. You need to follow the path you're given exactly, because these barriers block your path. But then, once you get the dash attack, you can ram into barriers, causing them to disengage, making exploration of the ship significantly easier. Before then, you could only pass through a select few if this giant robot attacked you wrong. This design gives every upgrade so much more weight than I felt it had in 0-1. Back then, a major upgrade basically meant, cool, you can go to the next area. They were effectively keys, quite literally in Area 4, where you get a key instead of a real upgrade. Well, in 0-2, by getting the major progression upgrade during the middle of each area, you can feel how powerful they make you not long after receiving them. Area 4 of Blaster Master Zero. Unless you purposefully ignore it, you don't know what that stage is going to be like without a hover. You already had it upon arrival. In 0-2, you know how limiting it is to not have this funny spring in Planet Strenga. Before receiving it, you have a specific path you can take, and that spring changes your interaction with the world you're currently in. I can feel my growth immediately by comparing it to when I was weak. All of this is what made me love playing as Sophia so much in 0-2. Fully upgraded G Sophia might be my favorite of the tanks in the trilogy, but how about I put my thoughts on paper about 0-3 before I make a decision. Now with Jason, as I said before, he got a Mondo upgrade in 0-2. There's quite a bit of him in 0-1 that felt a bit too NES. He only used 4 buttons, walked a little slow, and the weapon balance was all over the place. 0-2 improves upon him like 12-fold. First off, I already mentioned this, Jason's way faster in 2 and 3. He doesn't hold his rifle right to his chest anymore like a scared child. He runs with confidence and purpose. Eve is ill and he's in a rush to fix her. And he's got to keep that speed because enemies move and shoot faster now too. It can become a bullet hell if you don't go in knowing what's up. During the second half, you'll have some moments where you suddenly look over to see your gun level back down to half or 1. I had to play way more cautiously than I did in 0-1, and that's partially because the gun has been rebalanced on the difficult side, which to be clear, I think that's a good thing. So we've still got 9 different shots, and most of them are pretty clear successors to prior shots with a notable rebalance. I'm not going to go into all of them, but the most significant is making the level 8 shot only able to get 1 hit per bullet on any given enemy, the shield popping out instantly and staying where you placed it, which allowed you to do something else, and the brand new ones, including a charge shot that can eventually add elemental affinities with the correct bombs equipped, a whip that's alright for enemies right on the other side of walls, and a new shot that continuously hits its target until it wears off. That one is very handy for some bosses. And as they remove the electricity shot, that means that fighting enemy hordes requires you to, damn y'all might not like this, actually fucking aim the gun. Or if you want, you can aim less with Jason's new counter mechanic. If you look up in the HUD, you might see that Jason has a third icon and meter next to his bombs. By the way, the bombs are pretty similar to last time. Like, they're a good chunk stronger, more varied than previously, and I use them more often than before. No big old discussion about it. Anyways, the counter. It's fucking sick. Sometimes when an enemy is about to use a specific attack, you'll see a reticle appear on them. This is to let you know that you can counter their attack by pressing X. And if you do, a bullet time-esque scenario starts where Jason dodges and shoots them, or does a cool dashing slash through them. And later on, you can unlock a third counter where you actually time it to where their bullets are inside this little circle you make, and then their shots are reflected back at them. Due to the extreme amount of damage the counter can inflict, this is going to be the attack you want to prioritize using. Only drawback, it's a little tricky to use at the start. Some enemies have really short windows on when to attack, so if you don't know that window by heart, you might get fucked up when trying to pull it off. That difficulty does work in its favor though. Once I figured out how to use it consistently, it felt satisfying to pull off, especially at the harder bosses. For example, at this spinning crab, I initially couldn't pull off the counter on him. Because of that, I tried using bombs and careful shots to no avail. He was way too hard for me, so I gave up until later. The crab lived on one of the planetoids, so I didn't have to fight him yet. Then when I came back after mastering the counter shot, I was able to get a hit on him more consistently, which also happened to stun him for a long time. I loved the counter. It gives Jason's combat more dynamics than in 0-1. And unlike 0-1 where the strongest attack was spammable, you can't spam the counter. If its meter is gone, you gotta wait for it and be patient. I even feel more motivated to go into the caves because every single one has a worthwhile reward. Not a single one has a dead end. Plus, wherever you finish a cave, Fred pops out to give you a portal back to Sophia, which is so handy. I didn't mention before, but in 0-1 it selectively decided which caves warped you out and which you had to walk through. And if it was a dead end cave, you always had to walk out, which really rubbed salt in the wound back then. With all these upgrades, I honestly feel like the top-down portions have fully come into their own in 0-2. Between this and Sophia's improvements, I really did not know how 0-3 would improve beyond we made more levels. I had a slight fear that it would Mega Man 0-4 us here and go in a totally new direction, which it kinda will, but we've still got 0-2's story to go over first. So 0-1's story was, well, more fleshed out than the NES game, on the basic side. 0-2 takes it up to the next level. Each new planet you go to has their own storyline and 3 unique characters, making them far more distinct than those from 0-1 and 0-3 for that matter. Those 3 characters per world consist of a metal attacker pilot, their humanoid support droid, and their animal support droid. In each area, Jason and Eve need to find keys to the next sector, and whenever they land, they normally have a secondary issue that needs fixing involving these characters, such as slowing down Eve's disease, saving a farming planet from a greedy ruler turned mutant, or reconnecting a pilot with his droid on a planet split due to space anomalies. Without a doubt, the real appeal of these worlds are the new characters and how our main crew interacts with them. The 3 pilots you meet, based on Sunsoft games that mostly didn't come to North America, include the hot-blooded farmer Gonbei, based on the arcade game Iki, where farmers rebel against feudal overlords, Stein, the large Bara beefcake, who's very loosely based on this tiny ghost from a platformer called Kibereki, and Kana. In the nearly year-long gap since I initially voiced this video and now I got engaged, so I feel it's wise that I don't dwell on her design. Kana and her world take from the Game Boy game Trip World. You can probably guess from the title, Trip World had weird-ass shit going on. And Kana's world's no different. Flowers spinning you out, mutants overtaken by plants, and did you notice Kana's melons? It's insane how they designed her. I feel like they wanted to see if they could attach a sexy body shape to the most non-sexy, loud-mouthed, goofy entity to see if people would still sexualize her. And it's the internet, y'all take a guess if it worked or not. That aside, I really love these characters, as both fun personalities themselves and how they push Jason on his journey. First off with Gonbei, he's clearly an everyman thrust into conflict to protect his world. A normal guy with a strong spirit of justice. Kinda simple, and perhaps comparable to Jason in 0-1. Only thing Jason wanted to do was save his frog, but circumstances and that hot blonde girl needed him to save the world from alien mutants. Gonbei is kinda like an exaggerated version of that, while Stein, the last one you meet, feels closer to how Jason is now. Stein's main goal is reuniting with his support droid Tesset, a childlike droid based on a character from Waku Waku 7, a Sunsoft fighting game us Americans did get. Stein's motivated to do whatever it takes to get her back, which is impossible due to a rift in space splitting the planet they're stuck on into two halves. Now whatever it takes does eventually translate to have Jason do it, because it's a video game and Stein's not the protag, but it's his conviction that counts. It's similar again to how Jason today will do anything for Eve. Even if she and the other droids aren't true, living, breathing life forms, their relationship with their pilots is real. In fact, Kana's droid, Kenwood, raised her entirely, finding her as a sapling and growing her up to her very full size. He's like a caretaker to Kana, Stein acts fatherly to Tesset, and Gonbei's ambiguously close with his android Tai. These connections that Jason and Eve observe, how these pilots and droids complement each other, helps motivate them on their journey to planet Sophia. And I want to stress Eve's role in the story too here, because talking to her is way more worth it. Back in 01, she really just said tutorial info or said where to go with little flavor text dialogue. Well now, it's a lot of flavor text. A good flavor, like it came directly from the watermelon. Even Jason talk about their opinions on the world they're currently on, discuss the months they spent together between this and the first game, and we even get some of just Jason's introspectives. In one conversation, they talk about Eve's cooking and how bad it is, which is actually a reference to this key art made for 01, and I love that. Anytime I reached a new planet, I immediately checked for new dialogue. The two of them, plus Fred, are such a cute little family, and as a player, it motivated me to get her cured. I don't get how anyone could hate these two.
Sup, bitches?
Oh shit, that's right. There's a fourth MetaFighter pilot you meet. This is Leibniz. Leibniz shows up a few times to fight Jason both on foot and in their metal attacker Garuda, the only flying MA unit. He has a strange hatred for Jason and Eve, constantly calling Eve a broken tool while berating Jason for his naive sense of justice. The fights with him were actually some of my favorites in 02, not just because of their challenge, but the emotional baggage behind it. Actually, that goes for all the bosses in 02. It does a great job of making every boss mean something. Like back in 01, a boss was just what was at the end of an area. Level 3 starts once you beat the level 2 boss. Classic NES stuff. While in 02, there's a reason for every battle. You fight a giant mountain with a evil feudal mutant lord at Gonbei's world because he ruined it, a security robot at the spaceship because it was following you the whole world, and for one reason or the other, you battle every metal attacker pilot. Usually in their MA, but Gonbei's on his feet. And honestly, I was gonna say the metal attacker fights are the highlights, but I'm not even sure about that because all of the fights are so good, especially the 2D ones. The balance of Sophia to Jason bosses is way more in the Sophia boss's favor now, and they stepped them up too. There's a grand sense of scale during all of the monster fights, some achieved with platforming like a giant mountain that requires you to shoot weak points before switching to an on-foot Jason segment, or the aforementioned security robot which creates platforms you need to use to dodge attacks. Even though I'm in the big beefy tank, I feel smaller because the enemy was made larger. The metal attacker battles against Kana and Stein are also cool. After beating both of them, they gift you the big upgrades on their respective worlds. And during the fight, you can see them make use of it. Kana uses the drill to mess with a mushroom as well as hop high in the sky, while Stein makes use of the giant gun you'll use to traverse the split planets. And man, the designs of each MA says so much about their functions. For example, Gonbei's tank Quebico is only used to support Jason during the planet's boss by giving a bit of cover fire. So it's smaller with a mostly weak looking bamboo design with one large bamboo gun in the front. While Kana's tank, which hops around, has a rabbit design. Look man, they don't all have to be that deep. Now back to Le Beans, you fight him 4 times. Twice in the MAs, twice on foot. First 2 occurring in desolate areas with no main planets, and the second 2 occurring in the final area, used as a way to bookend the boss rush. Speaking of, let's talk about that area. Jason and Eve initially decide to come here because of their search for planet Sophia, but during the fight with Leibniz, it's revealed that his planet and support droid were completely destroyed by something called Planade G, a mutant threat that Jason now needs to fight. And here it also becomes clear why Leibniz hates Jason. Jason is aiming to do what he couldn't, save everyone and his droid, which I know is your typical Vegeta type rival motivation. Main hero has something that the rival doesn't, but man, if it works, it works. Jason definitely got everything Leibniz don't got. Though honestly, I think my favorite part about him is that he doesn't turn good or anything after you beat him. Finishes the game and Leibniz still wants Jason to grovel in a ditch with his limbs tied up. Jason does the typical typical shonen, haha, I beat you, now we're buddies with everyone else, but that doesn't work here. Finish your 4th fight with him and it's just, fuck you, go to the final boss. And speaking of that, this guy right here is crazy. You fight Planodji, a planet-sized mutant threat. If it's left alone, it'll continue expanding. If you destroy it, it'll blow up and destroy a ton of planets. The only option is to neutralize the energy of the planet somehow. Something Jason could only do if he had something that can squeeze energy out of the planet's surface. Oh wait, he has that. This is probably my second favorite boss in the game. You need to use Sophia's G system to pound out the evil mutant force. And you've got to jump as high as possible on these very small platforms and then jump down to deal damage. It's a cool idea making use of the new Gaia system, something you should be very comfy with by now. After Planodji implodes on itself, our heroes pass out and land in the new Area Omega. Here you wake up as Eve on her own outside of the tank. Just like 01, we have a secret final area with a new gameplay style. But instead of gaining a giant buff like Zofia 0, you're downgraded considerably to play as a tankless Eve suffering from her mutation. 01 gave you a victory lap, while 02 throws a final trap your way. However, she does have some new powers after the implosion. One lets her slow down time, and the other is a short-ranged move that heals mutants with her giant cat paw. While it's different, there's nothing crazy gameplay-wise here. It focuses more on block puzzles and platforming around hazards. Since Eve is unequipped, there's not much more to say there mechanically. It's still the basic stuff you played for the past 5 to 7 hours. Though narratively, it's a bit puzzling. Why exactly is Eve able to do this? Where's Jason? Whose blaster rifle did she suddenly find? And why can she survive outside of the tank now? Those are big questions that get thrown away by the bigger one. How do we deal with Leibniz showing up to kill Eve? Oh, that's how. A droid named Elfie appears before Eve with her own metal attacker Andrea, an MA previously piloted by someone named Rhodey. Elfie and Rhodey were sucked into Area Omega by a mutant cocoon, an entity even more powerful than a mutant overlord. Since she was by herself, Elfie sat here fixing up their tank while waiting for Rhodey. However, Eve shows the blaster rifle she found to Elfie, who confirms that it was Rhodey's, meaning that he's surely passed on. And as it turns out, so did Elfie. The Elfie we met is actually just her spirit wandering around Area Omega. Now, how exactly an android enters an afterlife isn't answered here, but maybe it's connected to Eve's ability to survive outside the tank. But let's push those questions over there instead. With a new tank in tow, Eve finds Jason petrified next to a giant mutant. This is the mutant cocoon, essentially the core of mutant kind. Think of like the big green lantern that the Green Lanterns have. All of the energy the mutants have eaten up has been sent to it. If Eve doesn't stop the mutant, then all of dimensional space will be destroyed. And obviously, Eve being who she is, isn't gonna be able to take this on by herself. She's still weak from the mutation, just got in this new tank, and seeing Jason down there petrified is messing with her mind. But thankfully, I did the side quest that net you the good ending, so Eve's able to summon the friends we helped along the way. Now, Eve and the other pilots are gonna use the power of friendship to take down the mutant cocoon. Eve hooked her purification power to Andrea's giant laser so she can neutralize the enemy, in the process bringing Jason and Sophia back for the final match. This whole laser moment is definitely the emotional high point. There's one more fight of Jason versus an even larger, even stronger mutant overlord. But it's not quite as hype as the Eve versus Cocoon fight. We're going from the weak Eve we've seen all game to a complete tank-controlling badass all within one planet. And the moment when the laser fires is pure hype. Tons of full PC98-esque pixel art portraits start showing up to give the sense that this is the biggest part of the game. One with Jason's cape floating behind him right as it's shot. I cried at this point. So much emotion built into this section. Like, Eve's laser, while having an explanation, is still metaphorically the hearts of those we met along the way. pilots who want to save the galaxy, Jason and Eve, which works out in the end, because as soon as Jason defeats the mutant overlord, they show up at Planet Sophia with a suddenly cured Eve. The G-Sophia trio enters Sophia, credits roll, secret ending that leads to 03. Basically, it just confirms that the mutants are still around because Leibniz, who was heading to Earth to emotionally torment Jason, finds out that mutants beat him to it, letting us know that the threat isn't over. 02 was honestly perfect to me. I loved the characters, loved the new weapons, stages, nothing felt dated to me like some of 01. Just in every way, I'd call this an improvement over 01. I had nothing bad to say about 02. And if I was in the position of making a new Zero title, I'd likely have no fucking clue how to improve it. My only worry was that it doesn't have a real ending, so could the next one fuck things up? I was hoping not, but first we got the DLC to talk about. 01 and 02 both have some neat extra modes in DLC. We have 2 extra difficulties and 4 crossover characters in 01, while 02 has 2 crossover characters and a light gun shooter-esque minigame. For the most part, these are exactly what they say on the tin, so let's not spend too much time on them. The extra difficulties in 01 are the Unlimited mode and Destroyer mode. Now, Unlimited mode has technically been there since release, while Destroyer mode was added for free in a patch, but realistically it makes more sense to talk about it with the real DLC. These are essentially your easy and hard modes. However, their specifics are a little funky. Unlimited mode doesn't actually change these stages, bosses, or enemies at all. Instead, you begin with all of Jason's bomb types and a fully upgraded Sophia Zero. So it's less of easy mode and more of a new game plus type of mode. If you're okay with getting the bad ending where Eve dies, you can legit just book it from area 1 to 2 to 3 to 7 to 8 for the Gomez fight in less than 20 minutes. It's not 100% my thing, but I appreciate it's here. Similar to how people have modded KH2 so you can start and stay as final form, I'm sure someone would have made a Sophia Zero mod anyways, so Inti doing it themselves shows their own initiative. Then with Destroyer mode, I did not find Destroyer mode fun. It feels like one of those times when the game developers were told game too easy and they ramped it up way too far in the other direction. In Destroyer mode, every enemy takes more hits to kill, they send a final shot towards you when dying, and when you play as the on-foot Jason, every enemy has immunity to a majority of Jason's shots. And I don't mean that you can ignore 5 shot types all game, I mean each specific enemy has a Mega Man type weakness going where some shots work and about 6 or 7 of the others don't, depending on the enemy. Meaning every time you reach a new foe, you have to do an 8-shot guess and check to figure out what to use. Not even the base shot works on everything, which makes Jason's on-foot parts legitimately unbearable for me. To break immersion a little, this video's been in a bit of production limbo. I wrote most of it and did the initial voiceover more than a year ago. To refresh my mind before editing, I thought about doing a Destroyer mode run, and within just Area 1, I realized that wasn't happening. Even the funny pod bosses, the first real one you might fight, was excruciating. You basically have to use bombs to get anything done here, but since you will run out, that means you've got to start grinding their landmines in hopes of getting more ammo. It's what made me realize that the hard mode here wasn't going to test my reflexes or knowledge of my toolkit, it was going to test my patience. To quickly compare to X2's hard mode, which y'all may recall me disliking, at least that one tested your skills. I disagreed with the extent of how hard they made it, but for the parts I did beat on X2's hard mode legitimately, I felt satisfied from my newfound skill. In 01's Destroyer mode, I beat Mother Brain and just thought, are you shitting me? I have 7 more areas. So yeah, if you want a harder version of 01, I would recommend playing normal mode with self-motivated challenges. Moving on to the extra characters, in Blaster Master Zero, they sold 4 characters for $2 each, but whenever the base game goes on sale, which is very often, the DLC usually does as well, so I got them for like $1 a pop. We have Gunvolt and Ekado from Inti's Gunvolt and Galgun series, Shantae from Shantae, and Shovel Knight from Shovel Knight. Of the 4 characters here, I've played all of their base games, except Shovel Knight, which always shocks people given my taste in games, so I think my opinions for each is fairly based upon their source game. And by that I mean Gunvolt and Ekado are cool, while Shantae and Shovel Knight don't really fit into Blaster Master's stages. Each character has a tank that's just a Sophia recolor, but besides parts where you have no option besides using the tank, like when you enter a new area, these modes want you walking around on foot with each character. They even this out by removing fall damage and letting you take more damage, but since they're staying source accurate, it's where Shantae and Shovel Knight have their problem. When you're in a 2D section, Sophia, Jason, Gunvolt, and Ekado all use a gun, so the entire game is designed with a long-range weapon in mind. Shantae and Shovel Knight use close-range weapons, so stages are just, in general, not really built for them. However, I'm not saying these two are totally unplayable broken messes in 0-1. You can always use the tank if you want until you reach a top-down segment, though at that point, I think I'd rather just replay it as Jason. Either way, all four of them play like fresh save versions of their source game during the 2D segments. Shantae can only turn into a monkey, Shovel Knight has no sub-weapons, Gunvolt tags to electrocute, and Ekado is almost identical to her mighty Gunvolt appearance. While in the top-down portions, they get to show more love to the source. I mean, we see some full-on fan service. Everyone gets sub-weapons from their games like Shantae's Puff Clouds, Gunvolt's SP moves, Ekado's Heart Shot, and Shovel Knight's I Haven't Played You, plus a few of the items such as the Health Up change to match the character you're using. Out of the four of them, I had the most fun with Gunvolt, probably because it's the one I'm the biggest fan of, but he also just feels the most complete to me, especially as a secondary run. Shovel Knight and Shantae play slower than Jason and Sophia due to their close-range combat, which for a secondary run, I'm not too wild for, especially when I work on these giant videos, where I prefer that my secondary playthroughs go faster than the original. It gives me the feeling that I've improved by my own merit, and Shantae and Shovel Knight are a little too different for me to do that immediately after a Jason run. At some point, I'll go back to beat 0-1 as everyone, but that'll be well down the road and spaced far apart from each other. Then with 0-2, we just have two new characters. Copen from X1, my favorite of the characters, and Empress from Dragon Mark for Death, who, to be honest, I have not actually played as yet. I want to wait until I've played Dragon Mark for Death first, which I want to make a video on in co-op, but I bought the game for a friend who wanted to play all of Gunvolt first, which now he did, but then he's got a job and my job doesn't match up with that, and point is I'm on a 1 Inti series per year streak, so Dragon Mark for Death is probably next year. I'll talk about it then. For Copen, he's legitimately just his X1 playstyle, but put into 0-2. He's got the bullet dashing, dash-based tagging, weapons ripped right out of X1. This is legitimately more of an X2 than the actual X2. Of all these side characters, this is the only one I beat for this video, partially because he has a real ending that slightly eases into X2, with Copen and Lola going into a portal, maybe explaining why he had the blaster rifle at the start of X2. Except if I recall, X2 said the blaster rifle suddenly appeared, meaning that the Blaster Master 02 Copen is either yet another alternate universe Copen who dropped the blaster rifle when time hopping over X Copen's world, or he lost his memories after BMZ2 ended. Quite honestly, I don't want to think too hard about that. This is just some silly DLC, and a universe hopping Jason also appeared as DLC in X2, but if y'all have seen that video that I made, then you know there's 4 other overpriced DLC bosses that also have no story implication in their base games, so I'm not digging deeper into this. Bottom line for the extra story modes, Unlimited mode is a cool bonus for beating the game. I did not enjoy Destroyer mode. The 0-1 DLC is good fan service for anyone who likes those series, and I'll get around to it eventually. 0-2's Copen mode is absolutely worth it, and I'll get back to y'all on Empress in a Dragon Mark for Death video in like, I don't know, October next year. For the last DLC, we have Kana's Raising Simulator. This one's different from the rest because it's not a new way to play the base game. Instead, it's a shooting minigame where you look around a top-down map from planet Stranga to shoot green, blue, or red points to grow your Kana into a different Kana species. You have a level 1, 2, and 3 Kana that evolves based on this flowchart. What color you put in Kana's pot decides what she turns into, and what you shoot decides what color you get. Though, to be honest, I've very unprofessionally forgotten how to get each type of point because this is for realsies a last minute thing I'm throwing in the video, but hey, look at me go! I'm shooting all those monsters in the meat from a year ago and unlocked all the Kana cards of various lewdness levels. Got the 0% lewd ominous Kana, a if you're into that kind of thing % lewd golem Kana, and the please don't tell my fiance about this % lewd Reese Kana. A little something for everyone, especially them Inti Creates developers. I mean, if Gunvolt and Galgun are anything to go by, they must have tried their best to relegate their monkey funky thoughts to just this minigame and the pre-order bonus posters. Posters that are so far in the gutter that I don't think I can even put them up for a quick joke like I did with the Gunvolt posters. I mean, Gunvolts were dicey, but I still felt okay putting a few of those in the videos as a joke. These? That's going in the personal folder. Anyways, overall, I'd say the DLC is alright. If you wait on a sale, you can get the entirety of 01 for around $10 and 02 for around $12. If you're a little more stingy, even on a sale, then I'd say get Copen and Gunvolt, but hold off on the others. To clarify before going in, 03 doesn't have any DLC, which I'm okay with since I think it helped them with ensuring the main story and gameplay felt like the final culmination of everything that came before, which I think leads us into finally talking about it. 03 came out 2 years after 02 on every major platform at the time, as Inti was on a boarding streak a little before 03. Gunvolt 1 and 2, Blaster Master 1 and 2, Dragon Mark for Death, they were getting all their big tickets on whatever they could. It even led to a secondary release of Blaster Master 0 with all three as Blaster Master 0 Trilogy MetaFight Chronicles, which to my knowledge is the exact same game but with Japanese voice acting. It never released in the USA and the online prices on it are a little much for games I already own. The extras that come with it look rad as hell, but that adds like $100 minimum. Anyways, 03. This is the end of Jason's story. Inti staff made that clear, and that leaves with it some big expectations. I had nothing bad to say about 02, so how's 03 gonna beat that? Additionally, I've heard many people, especially in the Inti Creates sphere, say that this is one of, if not, Inti's best game ever. So let's just get in and see. 03 starts literally immediately after 02. Jason's crew lands on planet Sophia after defeating the mutant cocoon, where they're promptly arrested and separated without explanation. So I guess their immigration protocol is the same as America's. With little time to ponder on it, chaos suddenly quakes across Sophia, giving Jason the chance to escape his cell and retrieve G Sophia, now upgraded to G Sophia SV using parts from Andrea. And so Jason's goal in 03 is to find Fred, rescue Eve, and figure out what's caused chaos on Sophia. While Jason does find Fred at the same prison with the help of someone on the prison's intercom, Eve is nowhere to be found. While he finds our security guards that want to detain him, mutants attacking Sophia, Leibniz and Garuda getting shot down, and finally, the person on the intercom, who happens to pilot not just a metal attacker, but the original metal attacker, as this is Kane Gardner, the same one from MetaFight, double confirming MetaFight lore into 0. As you may recall, he's Eve's creator, and the one who helped us get here, so he's probably gonna help us out. Fuck! Nah, you need to fight him, and he's kinda crazy here. Sophian forces strip G Sophia of most of your 02 upgrades, so beating him's ludicrously tough. Thankfully, it's one of those forced loss kind of fights you can lose, because Kane actually wants Jason out of the prison. You see, in the time since MetaFight, Kane's worked his way to the top of the political and military ladder. He used the fight with Jason to suffer damage to his tank, so he can claim Jason beat him in a fight and maintain his position, as no one would bat an eye if Jason's new turbo upgraded tank beat the original No Frills model. Which says a lot about Kane's skills if he kicked my ass that much. He tells Jason that Eve just up and vanished right after the mutants appeared, making the higher-ups believe that Eve's at fault for this and the new dimensional ruptures across the galaxy. Kane, as her creator, wants to believe that she's not at fault, but has no way of finding that out himself, leading him to send Jason on the journey due to his emotional bond with Eve and him not having government higher-ups holding his ass down. Instead, Jason just has the lower levels on his ass because his breakout is going to brand him a criminal. Not a I'm gonna clear my name type of criminal, he straight up is in the registry for life, under the new enemy title, the Blaster Master. And yeah, I pointed at the screen screaming and clapping like a monkey when Kane told him that too. As you may guess, this means that it's back to Jason and Fred for this adventure. No blonde babe with newly grown E-cups sitting in the passenger seat, which honestly made me kinda sad. I grew to like Eve a lot during 1 and 2, so it made the journey feel kinda lonely. Even when you pause the game, you see Fred's icon that you can use to warp back to Sophia in this and 2, but Eve's slot is completely empty, as though her chair is being kept open for her. It's also the first time Jason talks about his own backstory, which makes you feel even more sad about it, because he's had no family this whole time. He was born in a test tube and wasn't really much different from Eve. Both of them were created in a lab, but Eve had the love of Kane and Jennifer Gardner, while Jason secluded himself into his research. It puts more weight into how he felt living with her in the time between 01 and 02. And then they really rub salt in the wound with the first cave. Jason believes Eve's in there, but it's actually just a mutated copy of Eve, which is a new common enemy for 03. So after fighting her and getting disappointed, I knew G Sophia SV would be lonely.
Surprise, motherfucker.
At least that's what I thought, because instead you get back to it and they say fuck you, LMAO. Leibniz is in the tank. Remember back in the prison we saw him get shot down, so now he hitches a ride with Jason for the rest of the game. And you know, normally when the hero and villain team up, there's some kind of mutual respect they grow, like, oh, maybe I really did misunderstand you the whole time. Now I'm gonna help you. Yeah, nah. Leibniz still fucking hates Jason. He's constantly kicking his chair, watching videos Eve left for Jason without permission, telling him his efforts are futile, not helping one way or the other. Straight up, when I got back to the tank and saw Leibniz, I was legit kind of fucking pissed off. Not with the guys who made the game, just with Leibniz, which I guess is a good way to write a rival. It's as though he himself decided, yeah, fuck you, no Android GF, you get asshole rival in the back seat. And to be honest, Leibniz hanging in the back motivated me more than getting Eve, because I wanted to get him the fuck out. And I guess Jason did too, because 03 is really fast paced. In terms of how long it takes place, it's damn fast. Like, 01 is seemingly a day, perhaps a few more if we headcanon them camping at a save point. 02 is probably a week if we call each level a day, and 03 is seemingly over the course of a few hours. Jason zooming through all of Sophia to get his Android GF back. Or that's at least how I read it. I kinda wanna do a video going into the mostly headcanon of how long do games take place, but that's for another day. Anyway, to keep up with Jason's pace, let's talk about gameplay stuff quickly, because it's all very minor tweaks from 02, and I wanna get to that story fast. Getting this out of the way, Sophia controls pretty much the exact same as before, and most upgrades are analogous to something from 02. For sub-weapons, the only change worth noting is that the drill is replaced with an electric shock barrier that's more defensive. Every other sub-weapon is pretty identical, while Sophia's only major change is with the extra bullets. I said before with 1 and 2 how I was apprehensive to use them outside of specific contexts, because I didn't want to waste my blue meter on them. I'd rather save it for hover and sub-weapons, so I'd quickly turn on the machine gun for one enemy, or charge one cannon shot to break barriers. 03 circumvents those situations by breaking the blue meter into two separate meters, an orange and light tealish meter. The light teal meter is still the exact same as your blue meter from 01 and 2, but now your non-standard ammo is connected to the separate orange meter, making it so I'm more likely to use the different bullets than I was previously. You get 3 extras: a stronger standard shot, a short-range flame-infused machine gun, and a faster version of the cannon shot from 2 that goes through walls, so I guess it's like mixing the 2 from 2 together. And some enemies are weaker to one of the 3, which made switching to one of the others more common than previously. For example, these giant one-eyed snake-looking mutants jump out to attack you and sit there before unleashing a giant super move. So the best option is to use your flamethrower gun on them, since it moves fast and you can sit at a short range. While the square robot boss that hangs up in the sky for short periods of time is easiest to get with the cannon shot, as it deals big damage at a medium speed. Plus they designed it so mechanical enemies take more damage from it. Changing how the meter works doesn't make as big a difference as the Gaia system in 2, but it's big enough where I can now safely say that every part of Sophia's kit got some use, and the new maps facilitated that better than previous ones. Now, purely by stage count, 03 technically has the least. Only 6 areas with 5 on Planet Sophia, and the only one that's not is a revisit to Planet Stranga, Kana's homeworld from 02, which is mostly the same. And that may sound like it has less variety than 02, and honestly it does, but it more than makes up for that with the size and layouts of each. There is so much to find in every level, both items you can get on your first visit and extras you can only obtain by going back, because 03 implores you to backtrack more than the past 2 games, even altering the warp system so you can return to any prior save point you want at any time, which you'll need because these maps have you going every which direction to complete it. For example, Area 2 in 02 was Gonbei's world. Really, you went left of center, back to the center, then right for the boss. Not the craziest direction around. While in Area 2 of 03, well, the map kinda looks like this. A topsy-turvy multi-path design that should excite those ready for exploration. And as it follows 02's formula of giving you a movement upgrade mid-map to open up new pathways, you're gonna be going back. Which essentially is just 02 but bigger. Where it really changes is with these portals. These are dimensional rifts in space-time caused by the mutants, and by using what's known as the VRV system that Eve put onto both Jason's armor and Sophia, you can use these portals to enter an alternate reality known as the super dimension where the mutants are from. Doing this can remove barriers, flip the level upside down, totally change the level design. You basically get a whole new part of the map when you enter a portal. Usually it's just used as an extended platforming segment to get from one area to the next. However, there is a distinct difference in how you platform between the two. For example, remember the level in 02 that I mentioned was split in half? Well, it was split up by these insta-kill seas of super dimension space death. I found it intriguing how they made you change how you progress in that stage, though I do have one friend that dropped BMZ2 entirely at that world because he didn't like how numerous these were. And bad news for that friend, 03 is littered with these. And good news in my attempt to make him finish the trilogy, their use in 03 is a bit more thoughtful. Back in 02, they used the space death to kind of horse blind you on your path. Go where it doesn't want you to, or maybe jump too high, then you die. And since quicksand or ice physics were the floor in this level, you have an innate desire to jump. 03, they're more about giving you a greater consequence in the alternate dimensions. Fall at the wrong moment, and you are back to the start of the portal, which thankfully are normally placed by a checkpoint. And what made these areas even more intriguing is when you reach around the 3/4 point. Then you unlock an upgrade that allows G Sophia to swim through the instant death waves, which opens up so many areas you couldn't go to before that had minor upgrades that taunted you, or even mandatory segments you could see but not make it into. I think these special portals are a neat way to make the already expanded maps feel even bigger, and that is about where my discussion on it will end. It's hard for me to say more about the side-scrolling parts of 03 because it's just a turbo refinement of what we had before. I guess some of the stages are a little bit more gimmicky than 02, but I'm not sure it's worth discussing more of when I'm not going to say much new. So I guess we'll move to Jason. Somehow, 03's top-down segments surpass 2's by a long mile. Like, everything during the side-scrolling segments are about what I'd call a side grade from 02. With Jason, it's purely up. They've taken a less is more approach with them. Remember, my initial complaint with Jason 01 was that the weapon balance was all over the place. And sure, 02 fixed that, but there was still 2 or 3 items I never touched. A few of the bombs had rare situational uses, and the lowest level guns went untouched if I had something better. So let's start with the guns. Ever since the original MetaFight, you had the goal of not using the lowest level gun. Keeping it at level 8 took some work, and thus, it rewarded you with an almost objectively better weapon. It didn't worry about balancing shots because there was no function that the bottom levels had that the final one didn't. 01 and 2 had this weird midway point where lower level guns are meant to have affordances not given by the upper levels, but didn't balance it quite perfectly. They still wanted you to feel rewarded for getting level 8, so level 8 was still the best. 03 overhauls this. Jason now always has 5 different guns, and they all grow more powerful at the same time depending on your pink bar. As such, they no longer need to worry about balancing the strength of shots and only need to make it where the size and direction of shots matter, of which we have a charge shot, the whip, phase through wall shot, spread gun, and electric shot wave that hits all the enemies within this circle. As you can guess, these all have their own uses depending on the current level design and enemies you're up against. Multiple small fry, use electricity. Want to stun them? Normally the spread shot. Have a max level gun? Yeah, the through wall shot is essentially the level 8 gun from 1 at this point. You can spam it. Not as much as in 01, but I won't lie, this was still my default in most scenarios during my first playthrough. Though I guess the main reason it didn't feel as broken is because the counter and bombs were refined as well. Most of the bomb type items are on the defensive utility side, which pairs nicely with the counter. Because of that, there were many times when I'd walk into a room, random bullshit go, and see what happens. And if it weren't for my constant fear of running out of ammo, I probably would have done it more. Especially because the difficulty is ramped up in 03. You still have your normal top-down stuff like always, but the dimensional rift really comes into play here. In some of the caves during the start and what felt like a majority during the latter half, you have a choice to make. Go through a normal version of the cave with tons of Sophian robots and soldiers on guard, or activate the VRV system and enter a super long super dimension version with a large number of weaker enemies and a randomized maze structure. You might think the answer's simple. Go through the shorter path with a set pattern. Well, that's not always true. Sophian guards are jacked, tanking tons of hits, some respawn infinitely, and if you hit the wrong one at the wrong time, you're alerting the heaviest hitters. Even before the first one you enter, Jason warns you, hey, yeah, I think this is a bad idea, I should power up first. And obviously, like anytime I have ever received this warning in my life, I looked at that, said, yeah, but I'm built different, and proceeded to get my ass fucking kicked. Sophian guards do not pull their punches. After all, the Blaster Master is a wanted man, so no reason to hold back. Additionally, 03 introduces multi-floor caves, with each floor having a new choice on if you go the normal route or the super dimension route. As the prior two games were pretty short, I decided to take the alternate dimension more often than not. I figured it wouldn't add too much time to my run, though I'm not sure on that anymore. If we take into account that I died a lot when I took a real route, I probably did save time by going the alt route, though I think if I were already a turbo speedrun level master, then taking the Sophian guard routes every time might have saved me about an hour on my entire run. Now, unlike 0, 1, and 2, where I said I might do some self-motivated challenge runs in the near future, no way am I gonna go full in with 03 like that anytime soon. Some of these rooms get fucking wild, and to jump forward slightly, you're required to enter roughly 30 portals as Jason to achieve the true ending, so a no portal run isn't on the table for me personally right now. Though speaking of speed, 03 makes one more minor change to Jason with a big difference. So one of the counter moves back then had Jason do a little dash move, and when you didn't have an enemy to attack, it still worked as a traditional dash you'd see in other games. So I pretty quickly mapped that to L2 and spammed it often. And I guess someone at Inti also did that, because now we have a dedicated dash button. Anyways, besides what I said, all the top-down stuff is just kinda solid. It's yet again a little hard to keep going, so let's move to the final act. As I said earlier, Jason is pretty motivated on his quest here. Jason is trying to piece together the clues of why Eve is missing through hints in worlds and info from Kane and the returning Jennifer Gardner. And what this information mostly hints towards is that the mutants are trying to secure Eve, and Eve is not only willingly allowing this, but perhaps encouraging it. Which brings in the true conflict of 03. It's not about finding Eve, it's about believing in her intentions, and deciding what Jason should do about it. Jason's worried that he's gonna run into a problem he'd rather not find, which puts a large pressure on him. By this point, after saving Earth and the other planets in 02, Jason has a reputation as a hero, a paragon of justice doing what's right for others. And if Eve's causing the mutant outbreak, is he willing to take action against her? 03 especially drives in that question with a focus on family relations. We learn that Jason was an orphan that succeeded in his life on his own until Fred and Eve gave him someone to live for. Kane and Jennifer consider Eve a daughter, and Leibniz even has a few lines in there lamenting how he couldn't save his support droid. His fight with Eve is like asking someone to kill their wife. It's not something he wants to do. Jason is basically finding out that his wife is a criminal worthy of fighting. And in the final stage, they're really making Jason know this. Every mutant is heading towards Eve's location, making it clear she's the cause of it, prompting Sophia's military to decide on decimating her and the mutants in one big attack. An attack Kane postpones so Jason can try and fix it himself, but if he can't, then they're attacking. And so it goes about what you'd expect for a final area. Refights against earlier bosses, difficult mazes, the whole 9 yards. Once you reach the final boss, you find a giant new mutant cocoon holding Eve captive, and you fight it the way you had any other boss, only with Leibniz wishing you die instead of Eve cheering you on. And he gets his wish, almost, because G. Sophia, after 2 long adventures, breaks down entirely after phase 1, leading into a harder on-foot phase 2, which I found really tough. Like, I didn't mention bosses because honestly it's the same points I had as in 02, but this one gets a special mention because of how easily you can fuck up here. As a mutant cocoon that gains power through absorbing mutant energy, he can heal himself with some purple goop he throws down. So whenever that happens, you've got to focus on getting rid of that. It took me a lot of tries, but with a super weapon from Jennifer, I only needed to get the cocoon to about 1/4 health before blasting away. Because using some medical plants from Kana's world, this should neutralize the mutants and get Eve out of capture without killing her. Jennifer said all Jason needs to do is put his heart into it, so if he can do that, then maybe he can save her. With that blast, Jason was able to save Eve from being in a cocoon while destroying his armor in the process, which actually changes nothing. As it turns out, after Eve and Jason fought Planad G and the cocoon in 02, Eve becomes a full organic life form with partial mutant DNA. Due to the previous ruler dying at the same moment, Eve became the new mutant queen to replace him. Her goal for the whole game was to summon every mutant to one place, order them to move into the superdimensional space, and close that portal forever, thus ending the mutant threat threat without unneeded bloodshed, keeping Earth, Sophia, her family, Fred, the galaxy, and Jason safe from harm. A twist in line with Eve's character and all the hints were given, because it's clear she's doing something with the mutants, but us who have spent 2 whole games with her know she's not really up to something evil. It just doesn't fit. And yeah, this is technically a net good. It's a plan that the Sophian military can accept, but Jason can't. And so it's at this moment you, the player, has a choice for the ending. You either sit there and mash A like a certain dumbass with a YouTube channel might do, getting the bad ending, where Eve leaves while Jason just becomes a normal military man, living a normal sad life away from Eve, or Jason, after spending so much time in the super dimension, can tap into the VRV powers that his body seemed to absorb to make Eve's heart fire back. In the good ending, Eve admits that she really doesn't want to live the rest of her life in an alternate dimension with mutants, as she actually loves Jason and wants to stay with him forever. And honestly, I was taken aback that they really used the love word in an anime game instead of keeping the will they won't they going on, to notice that she still ends up going in, while Jason promises to reunite with her, no matter how long it takes. Just like the last 2, we have one final secret area, occurring a vague amount of time after the prior scene. Jason, within the original Sophia and wearing his fixed-up armor, has made it to the mutants dimension, and immediately starts a trek, presumably to find Eve. Which, when I say the original Sophia, I mean the original. It's got the exact same sub-weapons as the version from the NES Blaster Master, rather than Zero. I guess it was tough to rebuild after the first one blew up in Zero 1 and the second one blew up in Zero 3. Though I guess it's fitting to what this final segment and Zero 3 as a whole is. It's a sentimental look back on the entire Blaster Master series. So a topic I've left out for a while now is the title of the games. They went through a lot of drafts for Zero 1 since it was a reboot, and with Zero 2, they originally called it Blaster Master Zero G, a reference to the Gaia system, and would have gone with the themes alright enough. Jason, the hero of Earth, left his planet for space, used an Earth system to stomp out Planad G, and the Earthling Jason changed Eve, so if we really want to fucking stretch it, there's good reason to put Gaia in the title of Zero 2. In fact, if you look at the final logo, you can still see the G behind the 2. Now going into Zero 3, they knew exactly what to title it. They already called the second one 2, so calling the third one Blaster Master 2 First Blood wouldn't make any sense. However, they kept in the funny letter trick from last time with a sneaky little R here, and R standing for reversal, which before we get to the true ending, I think we're gonna have to talk about what that means for Zero 3. Well, during the gameplay discussion, I made it sound like Zero 3 was simply a refinement from the first 2 games. That's not exactly the full picture. In terms of game mechanics and the basic stage design philosophy, that's mostly true, but there's tons of small details that throw everyone who's played a prior Blaster Master, or at least any of the Blaster Master titles that matter, for a loop. We had obvious ones like meeting the cast from MetaFight, Eve working with the mutants, or Leibniz joining our squad after saving Earth, which, by the way, that plot doesn't go anywhere besides Libby using it to call Jason a loser, but there's so many minor aspects from the past reversed in front of us, such as many bosses coming back as normal enemies like Lord Gomez, the Mountain and Feudal Lord from Gonbei's world, the Eve mutants. These are enemies that truly mean nothing to those that haven't played the other games. And you know what? Y'all remember the alternative Kanas from the DLC? Those appear in the super dimension of Kana's world. Everything from before is reversing back to Jason, so Jason can save Eve from the reversal she's pulling on the mutants. Interpret how Inti is using the word reversal how you will, but for me it's more like a recollection or retrospective on Blaster Master. Perhaps I think that because it's what I'm doing myself. Which is why it's so fitting that we end in the original Metal Attacker going through stages partially ripped out of Zero 1, which itself copied MetaFight heavily. We have gone back to the start of starts, as did the other MA pilots. Yeah, they're not leaving Zero 2 out of the reminiscing either. We partake in fights against the other MA fighters here in the Super Dimension who have orders to stop or at least slow you down. My assumption was that the Sophian government didn't want Jason messing with the mutants, yet that begs to question, what's he trying to do besides see Eve? Kana, Gonbei, Stein, and their support droids are all motivated to stop you with new difficult patterns and a new older design for Tesset who calls Stein Dad, which I think is pretty cute. I wanted to mention it. It all creates a triple whammy of Retrospective with with 0-1's stages, MetaFight's tank, 0-2's characters, and I guess 0-3's ground combat if you want to go for a quad, but we had that 20 minutes ago, so it's not too retro compared to our Retrospective. Though after the 3 of them, you'll probably start thinking, okay, where's the last one? Everyone's been here, including Gonbei and Stein, that were never in the game. So where is he? And then he hits you. One final battle with Leibniz, who after his long adventure with Jason to find Eve, still takes a stance to fight against you. And I'm gonna pause to say this, if I've convinced you to play Blaster Master, stop the video and go play it. Because I'm saying this with full conviction, the rest of Blaster Master Zero contains the best ending in any 2D platformer I've ever played. I am not exaggerating one way or the other. All of what remains hits so goddamn hard, and I'd rather not spoil it as I ramble on. Right now, we're heading into a grand fight representing everything about Leibniz's character. Leibniz, with guilt from failing his family, his planet, and his support droid, claims he has something to fight for, a purpose that he's willing to fulfill, leading into something that only we, the player, not anyone else in the scene, finally gets to see: Leibniz removing their mask, revealing that they've had a feminine appearance this whole time. Now, whether they're actually female or androgynous is up to interpretation, but when you look through the game, they're never called feminine pronouns, they never made a claim themselves, and director Nishizawa's official statement is that they're an alien, so Earth gender norms don't apply to them. Jason down in his metal attacker isn't seeing this mask come off though, which is why it's actually only important for what it means to the player. Leibniz's facial design is nearly identical to the face of their deceased support droid, Lucia. To avoid reminding themselves of her, they've hidden their face, identity, and seemingly their feelings of compassion behind that mask. The mask coming off is them admitting they've changed. Because here, they admit that they're fighting for something other than themselves, a concept they weren't able to do before. Even when they saved the Earth, their reason was to show up Jason, not for any sense of compassion. So maybe, despite the battle they're about to have against each other, the journey with Jason imprinted his own heroism onto them, leading into what's very possibly my favorite fight in the series. Leibniz has a strong conviction to defeat Jason. You can see this from how they went and stole the Garuda back, the tears in the Garuda, their attack pattern. They're not going at this half-assed. Perhaps they do this to prove they're the best shield in the galaxy, make up for their failure to protect in the past. Given that even writing this now, I started to shed a tear when looking at the footage, I think for sure this was my favorite moment of the trilogy. The music, the pixel art CG, everything lands. The only runner-up is what occurs immediately after, which in turn elevated that scene. Jason's right here, in front of us. Something that shouldn't make sense. Unlike the prior two with all their DLCs, Jason's the only playable character in 03. And we're Jason. Well, not actually. For the final stretch, we get the grandest reversal of them all. We've controlled Kane Gardner in the original Metal Attacker, which in my eyes is a perfect twist. It suddenly brings sense to everything. Why Jason's friends fought against you, why your weapons match those of the original MetaFight, and why you needed the armor to transport to superdimensional space when Jason evolved past the need for it. It even elevated that prior fight with Leibniz. It shows that Leibniz is the better pilot by casting aside their distaste for Jason to protect him and his own goal. It brings the story of all 4 of these canon games full circle. Kane Gardner starred in MetaFight, Jason in the Zero trilogy, and now back to Kane for the very end. Which brings up the new question, where the fuck is Kane here? Well, Jason and Eve's bodies have shifted too much due to their stay in superdimensional space. Because of that, their bodies can only survive in the superdimension. Entering their home dimension will likely kill them. In addition to that, the couple have a dream they refuse to disclose to Kane. A dream requiring Eve to transform into a cocoon and open up a small rift between the dimensions. 2 actions Kane, an intergalactic hero loved by billions, can't let happen because that could mean universal level explosion, leading to a grand meta fight between Kane Gardner in the Metal Attacker and the Blaster Master in his new Sophia J1. A fight where you pick who you want to control. Kane, the morally righteous middle attacker pilot with what you've just used for the past level, or Jason, the selfish hero who's cast aside everything else for the woman he loves in what's essentially G Sophia SV with an altered design. A fight which I'll let y'all know was hard as balls. I'd easily say that playing as Kane here is the hardest fight in the trilogy. Additionally, in a MetaFight sense, this is absolutely a perfect way to end the series. After multiple attempts of separate MetaFight and Blaster Master games, Zero represented a fusion of the culturally dissonant ideas. So having the representatives of those ideas blast away at each other means so much more than just what we see in front of us. You pick the traditional sci-fi hero fighting for his planet and galaxy, somewhat of an Eastern collectivist ideal, or the Western modern hero who aims to reward his own individual ideal after he feels he's fought enough. No matter who you pick, the ending implies that Kane was winning, in the physical fight at least. Jason still achieves his goal of buying time for Eve. Using their cocoon, Eve births twin human children that would have turned out as mutants if not for the cocoon. They plan to send these twins through the rupture in space so Leibniz can raise them on Earth. It's Eve and Jason's way to leave a living legacy of themselves. A legacy that all of their friends and greatest rival helped them achieve. It's honestly a perfect way to wrap the idea of reversal together. We retreaded through our past, found out we aren't who we are, we start thinking that our heroes are up to something diabolical, and then it's actually just something selfish. I guess it puts us a little into Kane's shoes. He goes into the fight absolutely pissed, but after it's all done, he doesn't keep trying to fight Jason. He only gives a stern beratement towards his daughter and new son-in-law for their behavior, while Jason and Eve have a new satisfaction for completing their goal, mixed with the guilt for ditching their children. For just a moment, I want to compare this to the protagonists of Inti's other biggest series, as I find it a little interesting. Everyone in the world looked at Zero as a legendary hero both in the game and to the audience by the time he departed. Then the ZX heroes were the most prototypical tokusatsu heroes imaginable, and Gunvolt was unmistakably a hero to the audience throughout his trilogy, despite the way society shunned him. All three of them had strong convictions about what they did for the world. But with Jason, it's weird. I feel like we should hate him for what he's doing, but I really can't. He's had the absolute worst of it. Grew up alone, saved multiple planets, had a few really good months with the woman he loves, had to travel the galaxy to save his sick wife, turned to stone, lost his wife geographically to mutants after she got better, and was then told he can never have a normal life with her. He's been going through the ringer, and I can totally sympathize with him. There's not a single part of this he asked for. He's not some legendary hero like Zero or a gifted kid fighting for justice like Gunvolt. Jason really is just a dude trying to go about his day. Exactly like the old NES Jason, he wants to live with his frog and his wife, but ended up saving everyone in the process. Absolutely the most normal guy flung into a crazy situation. Anyways, after the kids are born, Kane goes back to Sophia, Jason and Eve stay in superdimensional space, and their two children, Roddy and Elfie, named after the pilot and droid from Area Omega, go to Earth with Sophia J1. Clearly a nod to blasting again for PlayStation. This ends Jason's saga, but leaves it open for a fourth game starring Roddy, an ending that I'd consider perfect. Without a doubt in my mind, the best ending to a 2D platformer I've played, and the best romance story in a 2D platformer I've played. At this point in the video, I'm at a strange point. Up next, I talked about hopes for the future, but like I said in the DLC portion, I wrote and voiced most of this video well over a year ago. I put down this project to do the reviews of Code Bunny and Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, then the 5-hour Crystal Chronicle retrospective, thinking I'd come back at a reasonable point, but real life situations slowed everything down too. I went to Vietnam for 2 months, got engaged, I'm figuring out legal work for an American to immigrate there, helped my brother move to Los Angeles, met an online friend I've known for a decade while I was there, and I also played Shovel Knight on his couch. Yes, even the DLC part was done a while ago now, and by the time this is released, I probably got my motorcycle license. I know that sounds like venting, but I'm bringing this up because what I talked about originally is rendered moot by my own shifting opinions and Sunsoft becoming a real-ass company again. Or if we're gonna use their recent game collection title, Sunsoft is back! Iki, Hibareki, and Trip World have all returned, as well as a sequel to a game they made called Gimmick, which is honestly crazy to me. The underlying theme with the entire first portion of this video is basically dedicated to saying, damn bro, Sunsoft is dead as hell, and then they've halfway made a return. I have no clue if these are good, and it'll probably take a while before I try them, but damn, they're actually back! Which, given the choice of IPs they're reviving, I can only imagine that Blaster Master Zero is a leading reason for their return. It makes me wonder if a 0-3 follow-up is ever gonna happen, or if Sunsoft wants to look somewhere else for now. But if it never happens, then I'm satisfied with how it ended. With the 3 games we got, I can easily say that as a series, Blaster Master Zero is my favorite of Inti's catalog. Yeah, I have a few gripes with 0-1, but not as many as I have with Mega Man 0-1, and I can't give Gunvolt my favorite series status because they can't seem to keep a consistent story anymore. Though Gunvolt 2 might still be my favorite Inti game overall, I don't know, might change my mind next week. The point I'm trying to work towards is that I'm definitely not on my hands and knees begging Inti for 0-4. The setup is definitely there with the ending and some album artwork featuring an older Roddy and Elfie hanging out with Leibniz in front of Sophia J1, and this other one with a big old party, but I'm okay as is. Assuming Inti and Sunsoft agree to it, I'd also think it's cool if they hand the reins to a different company for 0-4. One experienced in 3D games so they can follow in line with blasting again. Inti consistently throws out their 2D side-scrolling games and even have a top-down one coming soon, so if Blaster Master 0-4 tries something new by someone else, I think that'd be kinda neat. However, I think that's where I'll stop for today. I've been blasting at this for a long time, and I see no reason to continue the MetaFight.